The 2,000 cavalry his family had raised had already been taken by his brother to other battlefields, leaving him with this meager cavalry force. However, no matter what, cavalry was still cavalry. As long as he could break into the enemy's ranks, he could scatter them. Returning to the front line, 6 cannons roared continuously. The muzzle-loading cannons had a slow firing rate, taking 2 to 3 minutes to fire a single shot. After each shot, the cannon would recoil a short distance, and the gunners had to push the cannon back into position before they could reload and fire again. Nevertheless, the enemy was standing so densely packed that each cannonball could kill more than 3 enemies, and the sight of the dead was horrific. Those hit would not leave behind a complete corpse. The booming sounds of cannon fire echoed, with cannonballs landing in the enemy's tightly packed formation, stirring up a wave of blood and screams. If there were 10 more cannons, they could probably scatter the enemy from a distance. Fear began to take root in the enemy's hearts. The terrifying deaths of their comrades and their cries before dying made their hearts race. However, these men were professional soldiers, with a high tolerance for death. Not a single one turned to flee but instead pressed forward with gritted teeth. Li Chen watched this scene with a tingling sensation at the back of his head. In his expectations, after several rounds of cannon fire, the enemy would break and flee due to the casualties. But this was merely his hopeful fantasy. The enemy possessed the courage and determination to endure significant losses and continued to advance steadfastly. Li Chen felt a slight sense of emotion in his heart and then ordered Goblin, switch to grapeshot, fire 1 round, then withdraw the cannons. The enemy had entered within 700 meters. It was time to switch to the more effective grapeshot. These projectiles, the size of ping-pong balls, were bundled together with wooden boards and cotton cloth, resembling a bunch of grapes. This type of ammunition was most effective in combat at a range of 700 to 500 meters. The artillerymen, under the loud shouts of their officer, poked the cannon barrels with a wet brush to clean out the residue from the previous shots. They then poured in the pre-measured black powder, filled a cloth bag, and used a stick to tamp the black powder down into the barrel, finally inserting the grape shot. Everything was ready, and the artillerymen aimed the cannon mouths at the enemy formation. Gobu Hong shouted fire, and all 6 cannons fired simultaneously, each shooting out 12 grape shots the size of ping-pong balls, totaling 72 shots. Some of these projectiles scattered into the sky, while others struck the ground and disappeared into the earth, but nearly half landed in the enemy ranks, erupting into clouds of blood mist. A large number of enemies fell in disarray. The kinetic energy of the grape shots was terrifying, each one capable of penetrating a person's body and tearing apart another's armor, leaving it lodged within. This round of grape shot fire eliminated nearly 100 enemies. The enemy formation began to stir. The thunderous weapons of the demon army were slaughtering them. The soldiers started shouting loudly, trying to maintain order, but the continuous cannon fire still claimed the lives of soldiers one by one. Some soldiers' steps began to falter, and the once orderly line of troops became uneven. At that moment, the soldiers silently prayed, "Damn it, let that thunderous sound stop." Perhaps the goddess of life heard their prayers, for the terrifying thunder did indeed cease. After firing 1 round of grape shots, the artillerymen immediately switched the cannons to towing mode, and 6 mounted spiders began to move away. They would not give the enemy a chance to close in. Maintain formation, prepare to retreat. Li Chen saw that the enemy was about 600 meters away and took off running. The soldiers of the punishment army maintained a posture ready to switch to combat formation at any moment, retreating in an orderly and swift manner. At this time, Kes had already led 400 cavalrymen around the forest, coming up to the flank of Li Chen and his men. Seeing that the demon lord was retreating, Kes became anxious and, disregarding the fact that the infantry had not yet engaged with the demon army, directly ordered his cavalry, "The enemy is fleeing, prepare to charge. For every enemy killed, each of you will receive 3 silver coins." The cavalry immediately formed ranks, ready to charge. Based on past war experiences, retreating enemies were the easiest to kill. They were only thinking about running. If he led the cavalry forward, the enemy formation would be thrown into chaos, and then the infantry could rush in and engage the enemy in close combat, making it impossible for those over 1,000 enemies to escape. The idea was beautiful, but reality was harsh. Li Chen kept his troops in formation to prevent the enemy cavalry from charging. When he saw a large enemy cavalry force appear to the left front of the retreat route, he immediately shouted, "Defend against cavalry formation! Defend against cavalry formation!" Li Chen's shout echoed throughout the ranks. With 25 points of vitality, he was like a human trumpet, accurately transmitting the order to every corner of the formation. The soldiers moved quickly. They had already maintained a defensive formation, and upon receiving the military order, they immediately switched to a cavalry defense formation. The so-called cavalry defense formation consisted of a rectangular hollow formation facing the cavalry, with cannons and supplies protected in the center. The side facing the cavalry had 3 rows of musket goblins, while the other 3 sides had only 2 rows, maximizing frontal firepower and preventing the cavalry from flanking through other sides. The musket goblins completed the formation change, and Kes's cavalry charge formation was also ready. "Charge!" Kes shouted, and the 400 cavalrymen lined up in 3 rows, each about 50 meters apart. They gradually accelerated, running towards the Goblin formation, and as the horses adapted to the speed, Kes shouted again, "Speed up!" The horses transitioned from a slow trot to a full gallop, their hooves pounding through the wheat field, plowing a path. "Ready your guns!" At full speed, Kes tucked the lance under his arm, aiming the tip at the Goblin formation. He felt confident. What kind of trash weapons did the enemy infantry have? With such short spears, the horses would not be afraid at all. They would charge through the enemy ranks without hesitation. In the infantry formation that Kes mocked, Li Chen's loud shout echoed throughout the cavalry defense formation. First row, shoulders up with rifles. Facing the enemy cavalry, the first row of goblins raised their rifles in unison. They looked at the rapidly approaching enemy cavalry, still a bit nervous. It was instinct. Li Chen calculated the distance of the enemy's charge: 500 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters. He did not immediately order them to raise their rifles and aim, but waited for the cavalry to enter the 200-meter range. Delaying the order to raise their rifles would help avoid the soldiers getting nervous and firing prematurely. When the enemy cavalry was about 250 meters away, Li Chen shouted, "Raise your rifles! Aim!" The musket goblins raised their firearms in unison. The enemy charged within 200 meters, and Li Chen drew his great sword, pointing it fiercely forward. Fire! Bang 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 bang! A plume of white smoke erupted, and a barrage of projectiles surged into the enemy cavalry ranks, toppling both horses and riders to the ground. The enemy's charge fell into chaos, with many knights inexplicably falling from their mounts, and the bodies on the ground became obstacles for the cavalry charging from behind. Some cavalrymen, unable to dodge in time, stumbled as their horses' hooves struck the bodies, causing them to fall, sending the riders flying into the wheat fields, not knowing how many bones they broke. Others, trying to avoid the bodies on the ground, turned their horses to the side, disrupting the formation. After a successful volley, Li Chen continued to give orders. First row, crouch. Fix bayonets. The first row of musket goblins, having finished firing, did not reload but instead crouched down, planting their gun stocks into the ground, hands steadying the barrels, bayonets pointed at the direction of the charging enemy cavalry, forming a line of defensive stakes. Second row, raise rifles. Aim. Fire. After the first row crouched down, the second row of musket goblins found their shooting positions. At the command, everyone raised their rifles and fired a round at the cavalry ahead. The already chaotic enemy cavalry fell in unison again, their previously tiered formation now a disordered mess. About face. Third row, advance. The musket soldiers held their rifles vertically against their chests, collectively turning sideways as the second and third rows of musket goblins alternated positions, with the second row moving to the back to reload and the third row stepping forward to prepare to shoot. Raise rifles. Aim. Fire. The third volley erupted, and another burst of blood mist exploded within the enemy cavalry ranks, causing another row to fall. The screams of men and the whinnies of horses left behind a trail of corpses in the wheat fields ahead. At this moment, Kes had lost his earlier confidence. His face was filled with terror. Just moments ago, a row of cavalrymen beside him had inexplicably fallen, and he had no idea what weapon the enemy was using to attack. Suddenly, he felt a wave of weakness in his right hand, and the lance tucked under his arm slipped from his grasp. He glanced at his left shoulder in horror, where a hole the size of a thumb had appeared in the shoulder plate, blood flowing out from it. "Oh, goddess of life! What kind of evil weapon is the demon army using?" This guy trembled as he shouted, then charged into the goblin musket line with a few remaining cavalrymen. Kes's horse collided with the bayonets raised by the musket goblins ahead, the bayonet piercing the horse's chest. The horse let out a cry but still charged forward a short distance, knocking a few musket goblins aside. Kes was thrown off, crashing into the artillery protected by the cavalry defense formation, the sound of cracking bones echoing as he died instantly. Several other horses also charged into the musket goblin ranks, losing their momentum after knocking aside a few goblins, only to be toppled to the ground by the surrounding thrusting bayonets. 400 cavalry, under the rapid fire attack of the three-wheeled muskets, were mostly scattered and killed, with only a small number breaking through the anti-cavalry formation, resulting in single-digit casualties. The remaining cavalry attempted to circle around the square formation, looking for an opportunity to charge, only to crash into the muzzles of muskets that had not yet been triggered at other positions of the anti-cavalry formation. Another round of gunfire erupted, and a large portion of the remaining cavalry was wiped out, with dozens of them fleeing in disarray, no longer daring to approach. With the enemy cavalry dealt with, Li Chen hurriedly ordered everyone to retreat. After being entangled with the cavalry for a while, the enemy infantry had already closed in to within 100 meters, a very dangerous distance, and the opposing side began to charge with wild shouts. Li Chen disregarded any formation and directly ordered the infantry to run quickly. He then took several explosive barrels from the warehouse, setting the fuses to about 30 seconds, and tossed them in place, throwing 3 in quick succession before running away. Just as the punishment army had barely made their escape, the enemy's heavily armored infantry charged into the positions they had just occupied. They had been bombarded by the thunderous weapons of the demon army, losing many comrades, and a surge of anger welled up within them. Now, in the final 100 meters, they no longer conserved their strength and launched a final charge, intent on slaughtering the 1,000 damned monsters before them. However, the soldiers of the punishment army were not wearing armor. The heaviest thing they carried was that musket, truly lightly equipped. Upon receiving the order, they all took off running. Even the artillery was being pulled by riding spiders, racing wildly through the wheat fields. At this rate of retreat, it was impossible for the heavily armored infantry, burdened with nearly 30 kilograms, to catch up, and the distance between the two sides quickly widened again. At this moment, the enemy's heavy infantry had already passed over the explosive barrels, the bustling crowd covering them, with no one noticing the threat beneath their feet. Boom! 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 3 massive explosions erupted among the crowd, the explosive barrels unleashing tremendous power in the dense throng, sending dozens of shattered bodies flying into the air, while hundreds were knocked down by the shockwave. The 3 explosive barrels detonated in succession, killing or injuring over 200 people. Li Chen directly leveled up twice. A multitude of broken bodies fell, and many of those knocked down by the shockwave screamed in agony, leaving an indelible psychological scar on the surviving human soldiers, who howled loudly, with many even going completely mad. Now the enemy was truly frightened, no longer daring to advance. The horrific deaths caused by the demon army's special weapons made them unwilling to meet the same fate. Although the fireball spell of the mages in this world could also cause terrifying dismemberment effects, very few were fortunate enough to suffer an attack from a mage. Not many had witnessed a mage's fireball spell, so being killed by explosives was indeed a novel way to die in this world. The human formation halted its advance, chaos ensued, and the soldiers and the lords serving as officers realized that the morale of the troops was about to hit rock bottom. They hurriedly ordered the troops to cease their attack and did their utmost to reorganize. Continuing in such a bewildering manner could truly lead to the disintegration of the army. However, once they stopped, Li Chen did not run anymore. He saw the troops had retreated to about 300 meters from the enemy and ordered them to regroup, then instructed the artillery to set up their cannons again and load them with scattershot for another bombardment of the enemy formation. The artillerymen moved quickly, detaching the cannons from the riding spiders, setting them up, and loading them with scattershot bags. The scattershot bags were standard musket balls wrapped in cotton cloth, with each bag containing nearly 100 rounds. The artillerymen swiftly completed the loading, and Goblin shouted loudly to fire, with 6 cannons firing simultaneously. Over 600 rounds of ammunition shot out, some flying into the sky, some crashing into the ground, and more striking into the enemy formation, erupting in clouds of blood mist and eliciting cries of agony as the human formation collapsed, with many falling. The attacked formation disintegrated, and the human troops began to flee. They had been slaughtered like this for too long, even the elite soldiers could not withstand it. Some of the enemy formations were in disarray, and Li Chen was overjoyed. He planned to expand this chaos. Infantry, form 2 lines. Load. The infantry quickly moved into position, lining up in 2 rows, then loading their muskets. Once everyone was loaded, Li Chen shouted, "Front row, kneel down." The first row of musket-wielding goblins knelt. "Raise your guns." The goblin musketeers raised their weapons in unison. Fire! Bang 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 bang. Bang! 1,200 rounds flew towards the enemy. Although 300 meters was beyond the effective range of the muskets, with so many guns and the enemy so densely packed, a single volley still brought down a number of foes. Free fire! Free fire! After the first volley, Li Chen immediately ordered the soldiers to fire freely. He aimed to unleash all their firepower to further increase the enemy's chaos. While a volley was impressive, individual soldiers had different loading speeds, and with free fire, they didn't have to listen for commands, resulting in a higher rate of fire and accuracy. The goblin musketeers began to improvise, loading, aiming, and shooting, creating a chaotic scene. With 1,200 men firing simultaneously, casualties were occurring on the human side every second. At this distance of 300 meters, the heavy armor of human soldiers had a chance to deflect musket balls, but it was just a chance. Some soldiers still had their lives taken as bullets pierced through their plate armor. In the melee of the cold weapon era, armies had to maintain formation to preserve combat effectiveness, advancing and retreating together. Once a unit scattered, it essentially lost its fighting capability and would be slaughtered by the enemy cavalry maintaining their formation. Officers would often order their troops to march at a slow pace to keep the formation intact. Sometimes tens of thousands of soldiers would spread out, and with a distance of 1 kilometer, it wouldn't be unusual for them to take half an hour to cover that ground. However, this traditional tactic of the cold weapon era faced a disastrous failure when confronted with firearms that had an extremely long range and high combat effectiveness. When 6 cannons finished loading and fired their second round of scattershot, a large portion of the human formation was decimated, leading to a rout. Human soldiers began to flee in disarray, resulting in chaos and even trampling. The cries of despair, roars of anger, and the shouts of officers marked a sudden collapse of morale. The excited goblin spear ran to Li Chen's side and shouted, "Boss, the enemy is in retreat. Let's chase them. We can definitely drive them back to their homes." Li Chen occasionally shared tactical concepts and morale with those around him, and with the enemy in disarray, it was indeed a good time to pursue. but Li Chen shook his head. Withdraw the troops 3 miles, prepare to rest, and we'll launch a night raid. The Goblin Spear grew anxious. Boss, why not charge? You taught me that in this situation, a forward charge could likely break the enemy in one blow. Li Chen pointed to the enemy, who were spread across 3 kilometers of wheat fields. There are too many enemies, and we are too few. Didn't you see that the enemy is only retreating from the areas that were heavily targeted? The enemies on both sides haven't been significantly affected. If we let our troops pursue, we could indeed break the enemy's retreat, and that could potentially trigger a rout on both sides. But what if the enemies on the flanks don't break? Have you thought about the consequences? The Goblin Spear realized that if his troops charged into the enemy's disrupted formation and got entangled with them, they would be surrounded by enemies on both sides, which would be disastrous. He broke out in a cold sweat, realizing he had indeed underestimated the situation. Li Chen didn't blame the Goblin Spear, having questions showed he was thinking, and thinking led to progress. If the Goblin Spear maintained this mindset, he would eventually be able to stand on his own. Moreover, Li Chen was also tempted to order the infantry to charge and have the squad leaders throw explosive barrels, turning the enemy's retreat into a complete rout. The enemy wanted to boost their morale, but it would take them at least half a month to recover. However, Li Chen did not dare to wait. He feared that there were capable individuals among the opposing forces. The enemies' numbers were substantial, and they had considerable operational flexibility. If 1 or 2 knowledgeable leaders launched a surprise attack, his troops could suffer heavy casualties. After all, both the pursuers and the pursued were in a precarious state. With only the small elite force, it would be disastrous if they were caught off guard by a counterattack. The real battle would be in the upcoming city defense, and there was no need to take unnecessary risks now. Moreover, Li Chen looked up at the thick smoke rising in the distance. The mission to ambush the supplies should have been completed. While Li Chen was entangled with the enemy, Goblin Run had already led the cavalry to make a wide detour, maneuvering to the rear of the enemy's main force. With so many enemies, Goblin Run's maneuvering was inevitably noticed. However, due to the enemy's lack of cavalry and the cumbersome nature of large troop formations, the human army could hardly react in time. Goblin Run's target was solely the enemy's supplies. Without stopping to engage the enemy, the human soldiers could only watch as the giant spider swept past them, with no opportunity to intercept. Based on the scouts' descriptions, Goblin Run could roughly determine where the enemy's supply troops were located, and following that instinct, he indeed found the enemy's supply units. Unfortunately, the enemy was not foolish. Such an important resource was stored in a very precarious location. Goblin Run spotted a U-shaped mountainous terrain, steep and reminiscent of karst topography, with inclines exceeding 70 or 80 degrees, where a large amount of supplies was stationed in the middle of the U-shaped mountain. At the mountain's entrance stood over 5,000 soldiers who, upon seeing Goblin Run's spider cavalry approach, all raised their weapons, forming a formidable barrier of spears. Seeing this, Goblin Run quickly ordered his troops to halt, his brow furrowed in concern. How could they break through a spear formation of 5,000 men to burn the supplies? Goblin Run carefully observed the U-shaped mountain and came up with an idea. Follow me, Goblin Run shouted, leading his troops to bypass the enemy's guarding forces. The enemy, seeing the giant spider retreat, breathed a sigh of relief. My goodness, such a large spider was terrifying. Goblin Run circled around to the rear of the U-shaped mountain and found a gentle slope of about 70 degrees. He took a deep breath and patted his mount, the spider. It's up to you, go. The mount spider immediately began to scramble up the steep slope. With its 8 legs, the spider's powerful grip allowed it to climb up the incline, eventually reaching the mountain's peak. Goblin Run let out a sigh of relief and waved to the cavalry below. Come up, move quickly. Seeing Goblin Run's success, the other cavalry urged their mount spiders to climb as well, and soon nearly 100 cavalrymen had ascended the U-shaped mountain. The summit was over 50 meters above the ground, providing a panoramic view of the surrounding terrain. Goblin Run approached the side where the humans had stored their supplies, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Below, a large number of livestock, carts, food, and tents were gathered. The abundance of supplies was unimaginable. Ha ha, let's get to work. Throw down all the explosives and oil cans. Goblin Run shouted excitedly, pulling out a demolition barrel and lighting the fuse before tossing it down the mountain. The human soldiers guarding the supplies below were dumbfounded. Who would have thought that someone could climb such a steep mountain? They hurriedly began to set up defenses, with hundreds of archers rushing to the base, preparing to shoot upwards. However, they hadn't even formed their ranks when several demolition barrels were thrown down, instantly turning them into a mass of flesh. The tremendous power of the barrels sent the supply guards into a panic, and many of the draft animals were killed by the shockwave. Some barrels landed on carts filled with food, exploding and scattering provisions everywhere, plunging the entire camp into chaos. Oil. Start throwing the oil, incinerators. Use fireball magic with all your might. The spider cavalry received the order and began throwing oil barrels down onto the supply pile below. These things were made of ceramic, each oil barrel carrying about 2 liters of oil, and each cavalryman carried 4. A large number of ceramic jars fell like rain, smashing to the ground and spilling oil everywhere. Then the goblin incinerators began to conjure fireballs, igniting the oil. The goblin incinerators were second-tier noble soldiers, and compared to the rookie incinerators, their fireballs were larger, with the power of a shell from an 81mm cannon, and they could fire continuously 15 times in a short period. 10 goblin incinerators frantically hurled fireballs down, and with the large amount of oil, the supply pile instantly erupted into a raging inferno. The supply soldiers wanted to extinguish the fire, but the flames spread too quickly, almost instantly exploding, and with the goblins at the mountaintop occasionally glancing at a demolition barrel, no one dared to approach the fire scene. They could only watch helplessly as the fire rapidly spread, igniting tents, piles of food, and trailers. Some supply soldiers attempted to rescue the livestock that had not been affected by the fire, but Goblin immediately raised his firearm and ordered, "Everyone, aim at the livestock and shoot." He aimed at a ground dragon beast and pulled the trigger first. With a bang, the distant ground dragon beast was hit and fell to the ground, howling. The ground dragon beast was very large, and the firearm could hit it just by aiming at its body. Other cavalrymen followed suit, aiming at other livestock trying to escape the sea of flames and shooting, resulting in a large number of livestock dying, and the trailers filled with food could not be pushed. The fire grew fiercer, with thick smoke billowing, and a large amount of supplies were consumed. The supply soldiers managed to rescue some livestock trailers, standing outside the fire scene with faces full of despair. This wave of ambush had wiped out at least 60% of the supplies. Of course, Count Fisher had an army of 70,000, and with so many troops, there were plenty of supplies, so this loss did not significantly impact Count Fisher. But the outcome of a war is built upon one small victory after another. The fire intensified, not only igniting the grain storage but also slowly spreading to the surrounding forest, soon evolving into a forest fire. Seeing that the enemy had run out of the range of their firearms, Goblin hurriedly led his men down the mountain to regroup with their leader. Goblin took a large detour to avoid the enemy's main force and encountered many human soldiers forming formations to intercept them along the way. However, the spider mounts were quite agile, allowing them to bypass the main road and traverse the mountains, returning to Li Chen's position for rest by evening. Goblin found Li Chen and reported the success of the ambush. Li Chen was overjoyed and patted Goblin's shoulder heavily. "Well done, Goblin. Quickly take your troops to rest. Tonight, come with me to raid the camp." Li Chen had already decided on the strategy for the next few days, which was to continuously harass the enemy with firearms, exhausting them. Especially during night raids, goblins had night vision capabilities, giving them an advantage when attacking the enemy at night. Li Chen ordered the men to dig a pot and prepare food on the spot, cleaning their weapons and equipment. They had to deliver a significant blow to the enemy tonight. On the other side, Count Fisher sat slumped in front of a corpse, the limp body being that of his son, Kess. Count Fisher had thought this would be a simple ambush that would allow his son to achieve military merit, accumulating for his future leadership of a territory, but he never expected that his son would die. Count Fisher's eyes welled with tears, his expression twisted as he looked at his son's lifeless body. He let out a mournful cry, drawing his sword and wildly hacking at the decorations in the tent. 2 soldiers passing by outside saw this and cautiously retreated the way they came. After a while of venting his anger, Count Fisher convened a lord's meeting. In his military tent, he roared angrily at the gathered lords. "Break through Baroya. I want to kill every single monster, every goblin, every dog-headed man. I want to chop them to pieces. I want to tear them apart. I want them to suffer the most brutal punishment." The lords lowered their heads, afraid to speak, while a few older ones, familiar with Count Fisher, offered words of comfort. "My lord, please accept our condolences. We will surely do our utmost to breach the city, and when the time comes, we will capture the leader of the demon army and ensure he is torn to pieces." After a round of consolation, Count Fisher's emotions stabilized somewhat, and the lords' meeting got back on track as they began discussing how to deal with the demon army's special weapons. A young lord stood up to analyze. "Gentlemen, I was on the front lines at the time. The enemy was equipped with 2 types of special weapons. One is quite large, requiring over 10 people to operate, mounted on wheels, with an extremely long range, capable of hitting targets over 1,000 meters away, and it has tremendous power, firing large iron balls that, if they graze you, will result in a bloody mess. The other type is slightly less powerful, a personal weapon of the demon army, capable of hitting targets over 300 meters away and can penetrate the heavy armor our soldiers wear. Please look, this is an iron ball I found on the battlefield that was fired by the demon army's weapon." Several soldiers entered carrying wicker baskets. One contained 3 slightly deformed solid projectiles, while the other held a gun bullet. Count Fisher looked at these dirty projectiles, and the thought that his son was killed by such crude weapons ignited his anger once more. "Damn it! Who can tell me what the demon army's weapons are? Why can those damned iron tubes kill people?" The lords began to murmur among themselves, exchanging their thoughts. One bold lord speculated, "Could the demon army's weapon be some kind of crossbow? Are these iron projectiles fired from a crossbow?" Another lord denied, "Impossible, a crossbow wouldn't make such a loud noise, and these iron projectiles are too heavy to be shot far." "Then what weapon is the enemy using?" Magic? As soon as magic was mentioned, everyone turned to the corner where an old man with white hair sat. He wore a wizard's hat and robe, his face very clean, leisurely puffing on a pipe. The old man exhaled smoke rings rhythmically, and seeing everyone looking at him, he stood up and approached the wicker basket, poking the projectiles with his staff. There are no traces of magic in these things, they are mundane weapons. Count Fisher, with red eyes, asked, Advisor Fortier, the Mage Guild has always been dedicated to cutting-edge research. Do you know what kind of weapon this is? Damn it, it killed my son. The old mage named Fortier shook his head. I'm sorry, my lord, but I have never seen such a mundane weapon before, and I can't discern its principles. Count Fisher felt a wave of disappointment. Even the learned mage could not identify the origins of this weapon, casting a shadow over everyone's hearts. Amidst the chatter of discussion, the sky quickly darkened, and Mage Fortier placed the pipe in his mouth, taking slow puffs. His lackluster eyes focused on the projectiles, sparking a strong interest. Interesting, a mundane weapon can actually possess power comparable to magic. How is this achieved? I need a sample. Through this research, I can produce a decent paper. Moreover, those old fogies in the Mage Guild should shift their focus from magical research to mundane physical studies. Fortier had previously received a request from the Mage Guild to lead 200 mages to the province of Halgreen to assist Count Fisher in reclaiming Baroya and retrieving the important asset, the magical tide observation instrument. At first, he found it tedious, believing such actions were a waste of time and that he should devote his precious energy to research. But now, he was invigorated. He needed to find a way to seize the enemy's weapon for research. What kind of mundane weapon could unleash power similar to magic? This might change the Mage Guild's bias towards magical research. Alas, it has come to this. Let's get some sleep first. Fertile watched as the nobles failed to reach any conclusions and decided to return to sleep. The others did not greet him as he left, nor did they dare to accuse him of rudeness. In this world, a mage held such a transcendent status. Fertile returned to the encampment with several mage apprentices, where over 200 tents were set up, all belonging to the esteemed mages, each one a standalone structure. As Fertile entered the luxurious tent, it was hard to imagine that a military tent could be so exquisite. Animal skin carpets, a writing desk, a bookshelf, chairs, an unknown experimental platform, a massive mirror, these all highlighted the nobility of the mage. Fertile opened a golden box, placed his pipe inside, and set it beside his pillow. He took off his mage robe, donned a soft nightgown, and lay down on the soft, clean velvet bed. He put on an eye mask and stuffed his ears with earplugs, finally drifting off to sleep. The esteemed mage, even while on the march, must live a refined life. However, just as he began to feel drowsy, a thunderous explosion echoed from outside the camp, nearly sending him into a panic. What's going on? What's happening? Fertile yanked off his eye mask and stumbled out of the tent to investigate, while other mages peeked out of their tents, unsure of what was occurring. A soldier rushed into the mages' quarters, shouting anxiously, Masters, be careful of the demon army. They're launching a night raid. Fire! Gobu roared, and 6 cannons positioned 500 meters from the human camp unleashed their fury, firing a barrage of grapeshot. The human encampment was merely a makeshift setup filled with tents and lacking trench or wooden stake defenses. They had no time to fortify, and the perimeter was only lightly defended with some livestock and carts. The grapeshot tore into the camp, puncturing tents and killing many soldiers still lost in slumber. Kill, 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 kill. Li Chen led 310 system soldiers into the camp. He slashed a livestock beast with his sword and then shouted to the soldiers, kill all the livestock. Set fire to the supplies. Set fire to the tents. The soldiers aimed their firearms at the livestock's necks and fired, while the incinerator conjured fireballs to smash into the supply carts, and the punishment soldiers used torches to ignite the tents, hoping to spread the flames in chaos. The human soldiers were startled but quickly reacted, with teams of night patrol soldiers rushing toward the flames to stop the enemy. Li Chen pulled out a demolition barrel and threw it toward the approaching human soldiers. After a series of explosions, bodies flew into the air, and half of a 100-strong night patrol team was knocked down by the shockwave, the other half losing their morale and fleeing in panic, further escalating the chaos in the camp. But more enemies were arriving from all directions. Li Chen drew 2 hand cannons and charged into the fray, firing both cannons simultaneously, sending a barrage of projectiles that erupted in clouds of blood mist over a group of human soldiers, though many were shielded by their heavy armor. Li Chen set a demolition barrel to detonate on impact, tossed it, and with a loud bang, the enemy was scattered. He charged into the chaotic crowd with his great sword, wildly swinging and cutting down foes, blood and flesh flying, screams echoing. In an instant, he became a figure drenched in blood. The 310 system soldiers closely followed him, bound by their system constraints, never straying, maintaining a tight formation, thus gaining a numerical advantage in localized areas. Equipped with firearms and the entire army's hand cannons, they fired their guns, then their hand cannons, and after that, they set the tents ablaze, engulfing a small section of the camp in flames. Li Chen plunged into a group of human soldiers like a raging bull, wildly swinging his great sword, his strength of 25 points surpassing that of a human by several times. No one could withstand his strike. He had killed more than 20 people in succession. After scattering a group of enemies, he felt slightly fatigued. The relentless slaughter had rapidly drained his stamina. Looking around, he saw that a fierce fire had already ignited and more enemy troops were arriving. Staying too long was not a good strategy, so he immediately ordered, "Retreat." Then, he led everyone to quickly exit the human camp, running far away under the cover of night. Once over 300 people reached a safe position, Li Chen burst into laughter. The battlefield system automatically calculated the results, revealing that this wave of ambush had taken out 412 enemies, with no casualties on their side. If this continued, the enemy would eventually be unable to withstand it. Li Chen opened his personal attribute panel. He had accumulated 3 attribute points, all of which he allocated to control, raising it to 15. His proficiency with two-handed weapons reached 101, unlocking a choice of skills. Li Chen chose Rapid Strike, which increased his two-handed weapon swing speed by 10%, and after he killed enemies with two-handed weapons, his soldiers would gain a certain amount of experience. Additionally, his throwing skill proficiency also reached 68, as the explosive barrels he threw counted as throwing weapons. He had 2 options to choose from: Athlete, your throwing distance increases by 25%. Accurate, your throwing accuracy increases by 10%. These 2 skills effectively turned Li Chen's explosive barrels into heavy artillery, hitting targets accurately at 50 meters. He then opened the soldier management page, where all 310 soldiers were second-level goblins, with 48 having upgraded. Li Chen spent money to upgrade them to third-level goblin archers, then kicked them out of the troop and recruited goblins to fill the ranks. Such low-risk night raids were also a good way to train troops. After completing all this, Li Chen ordered his troops, rest for an hour, check weapons, replenish ammunition, and continue the attack in an hour. Artillery, fire from the farthest distance, shell every 10 minutes. Goblins, take your cavalry, each carrying 2 muskets, and move to 200 meters in front of the enemy camp to shoot and then retreat. Don't pursue accuracy, and don't get too close. Be careful of enemy mages. With everything arranged, Li Chen lay down to rest. He wanted to sleep but was too excited to do so. Realizing this wouldn't do, he called over the dog shaman who was with the team. "Do you know any hypnosis spells? Something that can make people fall asleep quickly?" Quick sleep was an important skill, especially in the cold weapon era. Being able to fall asleep at any time for efficient stamina recovery was quite powerful. The dog shaman shook his head. "No," Li Chen asked in confusion. "What spells do you know now?" The dog shaman had only used 2 spells so far. One was Fear, which Li Chen had used as a fable spell. The other was Encouragement, a group spell that could cause hundreds of people to have a burst of energy, ignoring pain for about 3 to 5 minutes, but then quickly becoming lethargic. It only worked on dog-headed people. And that was it. Upon hearing the boss ask this, the dog shaman's eyes immediately curved into crescents. "Boss, I've been praying day and night to the cursed dragon recently. She was moved by my sincerity and granted me a very vicious, powerful super dark spell that strikes at both the psychological and physiological levels of the enemy, even making gods tremble in fear." Li Chen instantly focused his attention. What spell is it?" The dog shaman grinned wickedly, sticking out his tongue. "Woof woof woof. I've learned the unspeakable curse." Li Chen tensed up. "Ha? What the hell is that?" The dog shaman grinned again. "Boss, I've learned the unspeakable curse. Do you want to give it a try? I can cast it on you right now." Saying this, he raised his staff and began to gather the evil spell. Li Chen kicked him into the drainage ditch. "Get the hell out of here. Learning some damn unspeakable curse. Is your cursed dragon serious?" In the deep of night, Li Chen led the team to launch 3 ambushes, and the various tricks just kept coming. Sometimes the cannons would roar, sometimes Li Chen would lead his team into the enemy ranks, slashing wildly, and sometimes the spider cavalry would charge in, setting fire and killing. If the enemy concentrated their infantry for defense, Li Chen would lead 1,200 men close to the enemy camp, unleashing a chaotic volley of gunfire to scatter them before charging in to slash. Throughout one night, with over 1,300 men and firearms, Li Chen turned the human camp into chaos, killing nearly 1,000 and burning down a large number of tents. The humans also considered countermeasures. They thought about concentrating archers and crossbowmen at the edge of the camp, but firearms simply overwhelmed. Cold weapons. Once Li Chen used his night vision to see the enemy had crossbows, he ordered the cannons to fire grapeshot to take them out, then concentrated all the gunmen to fire in unison from 200 meters away, eliminating the enemy's archers before charging in to kill. If the human infantry tried to gather for resistance, it would be even worse. Cannon fire, volley fire, explosive barrels, all sorts of attacks turned them into a mass of flesh and blood, leaving behind only corpses. The enemy had a chaotic night, ending up with a scene of devastation and heavy casualties. Finally, the human army endured until dawn, each of them sporting dark circles under their eyes, their spirits extremely low. A night of cannon and gunfire had disturbed their minds, and now they felt a desire to die. Inside Count Fisher's tent, he roared in anger. "By the goddess of life, does that damned demon army not wish to rest for even a moment? Who can tell me how to deal with such weapons?" The lords also looked grim. The entire army had been set ablaze last night, and none of them had slept well, with many of their soldiers suffering injuries. They had exhausted all means to resist the demon army's night raid, but the objective gap in weaponry existed, and such an advantage could not be smoothed over by strategy. At this moment, the nobles were pondering if the demon army of Beroya was equipped with thunderous weapons. Were they here to attack or to die? Seeing no one answer, Count Fisher grew even angrier. He scanned the room and suddenly noticed someone was missing. Why hasn't Baron Ron come? That damned lazybones can't even attend an important meeting. Is he sleeping? A silence fell over the crowd, and an old noble indifferently replied, Baron Ron was killed last night while mobilizing troops to respond to the demon army's ambush. This fellow had very ornate decorations on his plate armor and was sniped by a goblin archer. Last night, that goblin archer had taken down many humans clad in splendid plate armor. Count Fisher was taken aback, then fell into deep thought. Dark clouds loomed over everyone's heads, and they silently tasted the bitterness of their situation. Suddenly, the sound of cannon fire thundered outside again. The soldiers outside the tent erupted into a chaotic clamor, and a soldier rushed into the tent shouting, My lords! The enemy has launched another attack. All the lords were furious, especially Count Fisher, whose face turned as red as a monkey's backside. If this continued, they would be scattered before reaching Beroya. At this moment, the old mage, Fortier, sitting in the corner, spoke up. I say, my lords, why not split the army into several routes and march directly towards Beroya? Everyone turned to look at him. The old mage Fortier leisurely puffed on his pipe, stood up, and pointed at the marching map on the table with his staff. It's only 80 miles to Beroya. A forced march for 2 days will get us to the city. The enemy has at most 1,000 men. They wouldn't dare split their forces to intercept us. In other words, as long as the army marches straight towards Beroya without concern, the enemy wouldn't dare to engage us. They must return to defend Beroya. Upon hearing this, the lords found it brilliant, not engaging the enemy and directly attacking Beroya would force the opponent to return to defend. The lords immediately began to discuss loudly, finding it feasible, and then devised a marching plan, splitting the troops and supplies into 10 routes, surrounding Beroya. However, they had concerns again. Damn it, if they reached Beroya, wouldn't they be obliterated by the enemy's thunderous weapons? Old Mage Fortier, seeing everyone's concerns, smiled and reminded them, everyone, the enemy's weapons of this kind will definitely not be many. If they had more, would they still be playing around with us like this? The lords thought about it and felt reassured to carry out their tasks. On the other side, Li Chen led his troops to complete another artillery strike, then retreated 3 miles to rest. At this point, Li Chen's soldiers were quite exhausted. After a night of night raids, with both gunfire and cannon fire, their mental state was not great. However, Li Chen rotated them for the night raids, allowing them to catch a little sleep in the late hours, so their condition was slightly better than that of the humans. Upon returning, Li Chen upgraded the soldiers. After a night of fighting, combined with previous efforts, over 700 members of the Punishment Army's old 10th Company had reached level 3. If they continued to grind for another day or two, they would achieve the goal of having everyone at level 3. Everyone, hurry up and eat and rest. We will continue the attack in 2 hours. Li Chen shouted, pulling out some beast jerky from the system warehouse to distribute among the group. He himself ate 5 or 6 pieces of jerky and lay down to sleep. Right there. He didn't care about comfort. His body was covered in blood and he smelled terrible, dirty as could be. In the early days, a little hardship was just part of it. Li Chen used an ammunition box as a pillow, forcing himself to think of nothing and quickly fall asleep. But from a distance, the sound of the spider mounts running could be heard, and the noise was getting closer. Li Chen opened his eyes and sat up, only to see Gobu Pao jumping down from his spider mount, shouting, Boss, the enemy is on the move. They've split into over 10 groups and are heading quickly towards Beroya. Li Chen frowned, his mind racing, and then his expression changed. Damn, this is really something. Li Chen instantly understood the enemy's intentions. They had indeed countered his attacks, making it impossible for him to continue harassing them. The enemy was marching forcefully, leaving many vulnerabilities in their ranks, and a strong attack could severely damage one of their groups. However, if he did that, the other enemy forces would reach Beroya, and the Punishment Army's old 10th Company would likely struggle to enter the city. After weighing the options, Li Chen decided to play it safe and head back to Beroya. However, he wanted to leave a unit outside the city to harass the enemy. Li Chen looked at Gobu Pao and issued a serious order. Gobu Pao, I need to take a team back to the city. I'll give you 2 cannons and have your men load them with ammunition. You find opportunities to attack the enemy outside. Gobu Pao's face was serious. Boss, I guarantee to complete the mission. Li Chen was very satisfied and continued to explain, your numbers are small, but your mobility is strong. Remember, do not engage the enemy forces head-on, maximize harassment while ensuring your own safety. You can attack the enemy's supply lines, eliminate small enemy units, and, if you find the chance, shell the enemy's main camp a few times. In short, imagine yourself as a mosquito and the enemy as a giant beast. Your little mosquito must keep the giant beast from resting. Gobu Pao patted his chest. Boss, I understand. Don't worry, I have 96 brothers with me, and when the battle is over, I will definitely bring all 96 of them back safely. Li Chen was even more pleased. This statement proved that Gobu Pao understood the essence of harassment. Tactics. With nearly 100 cavalry, in a situation where the enemy lacked cavalry, their effectiveness would surpass that of 1,000 men. Li Chen ordered the entire army to assemble, handing over the excess ammunition to Gobu Pao, and then planned to return to the city. As they prepared to depart, Li Chen asked Gobu Pao, if you encounter any unexpected events and lose combat capability, you must lead your team back to the alliance. Remember, you must ensure your own safety. Do you need anything else? Gobu Pao thought for a moment and made a request. Boss, do you have any demolition barrels? Li Chen tossed 30 demolition barrels on the spot. This is all there is, use them sparingly. Up to now, Li Chen only had 60 demolition barrels left, giving 30 to Gobu Pao to create miracles, while keeping the remaining 30 for defense. In the following 2 days, Count Fischer's army completely ignored Li Chen's harassment, advancing at the fastest pace directly towards Beroya. Li Chen seized the opportunity to engage in a battle with an enemy in one direction, killing several hundred of them before quickly retreating back to Beroya. He dared not linger too long, as enemy troops had already raced ahead of him. One misstep and he would be unable to return to Beroya. Moreover, if a certain enemy general were to whimsically decide to encircle Beroya, it would be disastrous for him. Therefore, after taking the chance to strike a blow against the enemy, he did not dare to stay any longer and led his men to withdraw. As for Count Fischer, due to making the right decisions, his troops were at the gates of the city within 2 days. Count Fischer, accompanied by a group of nobles, stood outside the cannon range, observing Beroya, the largest town in the province of Heluyan. Upon seeing the section of the city wall that Li Chen had blown up, Count Fischer's eyes lit up. He pointed to that part of the wall and said to the other lords, this section of the wall has collapsed. Although it has been repaired and there are moats, this is the weak point of the wall. As long as we attack here, we will surely take Beroya. The lords nodded in unison, their faces filled with excitement as they looked at the gap. Although Li Chen had made great efforts to repair the breach in the wall, it was difficult to find suitable building materials and adhesives in the surrounding areas, so the repair speed was very slow. The height of the Beroya city wall was about 25 meters, and the breach had only been repaired for over 10 meters, with more than 10 meters blocked off with wood. In front of the breach, there were 3 circular moats, each 2 meters deep and 3 meters wide. The lords smiled at these makeshift defenses. As feudal lords, they were all experts in siege warfare, and they had 100 ways to break through these defenses, exactly 100. Count Fischer's mood improved significantly. He felt that the nature of the war was finally returning to familiar territory. He ordered the lords, gentlemen, once the soldiers are stationed, immediately surround the city, construct defensive works, and prepare for the siege. The lords glanced at the surrounding mountaintops, which had been scorched bare by fire, each of them frowning deeply. My lord, the enemy has set fire to the mountains, and there are no building materials to be found within 10 miles. What should we do? Li Chen had been resolute in setting the mountains ablaze, and the surrounding mountainous areas had been completely burned clean. In some places, as soon as the fire stopped, he sent people to fill in the gaps, causing a devastating blow to the surrounding ecological environment. If the environmental activists saw this, they would surely drown him in oil from their wealthy fathers. Count Fischer looked at the distant farms, where there were numerous wooden houses, and the serfs were hiding in their homes, peeking out through the cracks in the doors and windows at the approaching army. He pointed towards those farms, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Building materials? Aren't there plenty? These lowly slaves are the subjects of the demon army. Soldiers, punish them well. Everyone turned to look at the farms, sharing knowing smiles. They had accumulated a lot of resentment along the way, and it was indeed time for the soldiers to vent their frustrations. Moreover, they had learned from the fleeing gentry that these slaves had dared to rebel, and they must be punished severely. The lords rallied their soldiers and charged towards the farms, their troops moving like bandits, with the tragic suffering known only to the tormented serfs. The poor serfs, who had not suffered a bit under the demon lords' rule, had instead tasted the flavor of freedom. But just a few months later, the nobles' blades had fallen again. Amidst the wails of the serfs, Count Fischer obtained a large amount of building materials. He immediately thought to order the construction of engineering equipment, but the old mage Fortier had a different opinion. My lord, please wait. Beroya is a key stronghold in the Heluyan province, with very sturdy walls and over 10,000 monsters inside. This will certainly be a difficult battle, not to mention the enemy has special weapons. I believe we should not rush to attack, but rather build a camp to prevent the enemy from using special weapons to attack us at night. Count Fischer humbly asked, do you have any advice, my lord? The old mage Fortier exhaled a smoke ring, leisurely replying, dig trenches 1 kilometer in front of the camp and hide soldiers within them. This way, even if the enemy uses special weapons for long-range strikes, the soldiers hiding in the trenches won't be harmed. If the enemy charges, the soldiers can then rush out and engage in close combat, returning us to the battlefield we are familiar with. The lords were greatly impressed upon hearing this, praising the old mage Fortier for his vast knowledge. The old Mage 40er smiled without speaking. This method was something they had devised back when the Mage Legion attacked the Donovan Kingdom, after suffering some losses. The most commonly used attack spell by mages, the Fireball, is similar to artillery, just with a shorter range, about 150 to 200 meters, but with a bit of mana it can be thrown up to 300 meters. A fireball exploding at close range can kill 2 or 3 ordinary soldiers. The Donovan Kingdom's legion was bombarded by fireballs to the point of being unable to care for themselves, let alone think about survival, so they had to adapt and develop the scattered pit tactic. By digging scattered pits and having soldiers hide within them, the spells could not strike the soldiers from a distance. If the mages approached, the soldiers could rush out from the pits, dragging the battlefield into the close combat they were most familiar with. This tactic caused quite a bit of trouble for the Mage Legion and was studied for a long time by the Magic Guild as a typical case. On the other side, Li Chen on the city wall side upon seeing the enemy's large army digging trenches. There were capable individuals among the opposing forces. After suffering a setback, they thought to dig trenches to avoid cannon and gunfire, making it impossible for him to strike the enemy recklessly with artillery. His gaze shifted to several farms visible from the city wall, where Count Fisher's soldiers were rampaging. These soldiers had endured immense pressure on their way here, and tormenting the serfs became their way of releasing that pressure. Li Chen's eyelids twitched violently as he witnessed many unsightly scenes, making him question whether he was the goblin or if the human soldiers across from him were the real goblins. At the same time, he sighed for the serfs in his heart. He had ordered the mountains to be burned and had sent the security forces to warn the serfs that Count Fisher's army would surely seek building materials nearby and that the army would demolish their homes. What good could come from the army entering the village? The security forces had urged them to flee, and Li Chen was even willing to provide some food as rations for their escape. However, no matter what, there were always some who chose to stay in each farm. On one hand, it was a sense of luck, and on the other, they feared the outside world. For ordinary people in this era, the limitations of distance sometimes felt further than life and death. A world 30 miles away was a new world to them. People are afraid of unfamiliar territories, so many serfs chose to stay, entrusting everything to the goddess of life. Unfortunately, the goddess of life did not favor them. Li Chen withdrew his gaze and ordered the officers beside him, open the city gates and roll out the cannons to fire a few shots, create some trouble for the enemy. The enemy's trenches were not yet fully formed, and their artillery ammunition was plentiful, so they naturally had to go out and cause some trouble, slowing down the trench digging process. The city gates opened, and 4 cannons were pulled out by riding spiders. Li Chen led 310 system soldiers to charge within 500 meters of the enemy lines, using the cannons to strike at the enemy army. The enemy's trench digging team lost a few men to cannon fire, but the humans were very determined in their trench digging efforts, starting from several directions. Simultaneously, with some even digging from small slopes that were out of the cannon's range. Thousands of pits were being dug at the same time. Li Chen could only manage one area and couldn't control the others. Moreover, the enemy had adopted a suspected 3-3 formation for their scattered infantry, lying in the depressions of the terrain, in places where the muskets could not reach. Li Chen looked and thought, hey, what a great opportunity. The enemy is so scattered. If I bring some men up there for a slaughter, we could gain a local advantage in numbers and have a chance to break apart some of the enemy forces. But as soon as I get close with my troops, ready to unleash a volley from the muskets, a bunch of scattered soldiers rise up from other directions, surrounding Li Chen. This frightens Li Chen, and he immediately leads his men back to the city. Looking from the city wall, Li Chen sees that the enemy's formation vaguely resembles a triangle. If you attack any corner of the triangle, the other 2 corners will simultaneously launch an attack, making it an excellent choice for large-scale melee troops to counter small groups of ranged soldiers. Li Chen is puzzled. He feels that every step the enemy takes is so correct, as if they have a wealth of experience dealing with ranged troops. Donovan Kingdom, are you thinking about me? Li Chen is helpless. The enemy is adopting a conservative strategy, and he has no good way to break the deadlock, so he can only engage in conventional warfare. The human soldiers have been digging all morning, and the trench system is starting to take shape. Now they can stay in the trenches and dig towards the city wall, making it safer. Li Chen looks at the trench approaching the city wall and feels there's nothing he can do but fret. By nightfall, the human soldiers haven't stopped. Shovels of dirt are flying out of the trenches, indicating they plan to work in shifts around the clock. Li Chen knows that once the trench system is fully completed, he won't have the chance to weaken the enemy forces by going outside, so under the cover of night, when the humans lack night vision, he rushes outside, leading his men into the trenches to fight the enemy. Stay close. Don't fall behind. Kill. Li Chen shouts to the soldiers behind him, leaping into a trench and directly trampling an unsuspecting human soldier. There are several human soldiers digging in the trench, and since they are working, they aren't armed or armored. When they see such a large goblin jump in, they nearly die of fright. With a hand cannon in his left hand and an axe in his right, Li Chen begins to slash and kill like a tiger entering a wolf pack. The soldiers behind him, clad in heavy armor and armed with muskets fitted with bayonets, quickly fire at the surrounding human soldiers. The sound of gunfire echoes through the night as Li Chen crazily slaughters in the trench, killing more than 10 people in the blink of an eye and taking control of a trench. The enemy's main force comes to support, including many archers who lie in other trenches, shooting at the trench Li Chen and his men have taken. But Li Chen and his soldiers are all in heavy armor, and the crossbows can't penetrate their defenses. The two trenches are less than 20 meters apart. After a round of fire from the humans, the goblins are unharmed, while Li Chen's side takes down over 30 enemies in return. Seeing the soldiers in the opposite trench suppressed and too afraid to show their heads, Li Chen loudly orders his soldiers, "Everyone, load your ammunition! Load your ammunition! Charge forward! Put your guns to their chests and shoot!" The soldiers understand and immediately stop firing, all loading their muskets in unison. Li Chen waits about 20 seconds, feeling it's time, and then charges out of the trench first. "Charge!" the musket-wielding goblins shout as they rush out. The human soldiers, hearing the shout, immediately rise and shoot a volley of crossbow bolts, but they all bounce off the heavy armor of the musket goblins. The human soldiers can only watch in terror as the goblins rush to the edge of the trench, standing above and pointing their muskets down at them, almost shoving the gun barrels in their faces to shoot. Bang 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 bang. In a round of point-blank shooting, over 50 enemies in the trench are killed, and the enemy is completely wiped out. Li Chen looks at the bodies of the archers in the trench, feeling a rush of exhilaration. He feels he has finally mastered the musket. The efficiency of heavy-armored musket soldiers shooting at point-blank range is incredibly high. Ha ha, well done, warriors. Load up quickly, we'll do it again. Li Chen senses the sound of crossbow bolts striking the back of his armor, knowing it's the enemy in the trench behind him, and he plans to replicate the extreme close-range shooting once more. But just then, the great bell on the city wall rang, its booming sound echoing through the night. Seeing this, Li Chen had no choice but to abandon all actions and loudly ordered his troops to run towards the city gate. The ringing bell signified that the goblins on the wall had spotted the enemy's large force encircling them, warning them to flee quickly. Although Li Chen's troops were elite, they could not withstand being surrounded by thousands of enemies. Once encircled, there was a real danger of total annihilation. The enemy was also quite capable, constantly executing encirclement maneuvers. Every time Li Chen led his troops into the enemy ranks, before he could inflict any unacceptable damage, the enemy's flanking units would arrive, keeping Li Chen's ambush in a state of mere scratching the surface. Moreover, Li Chen noticed that the speed of the enemy's flanking units was increasing. At first, he could lead his team to fight for over 10 minutes, but now he could only last less than 5 minutes before needing to retreat. He knew this was due to the enemy establishing rapid response units. These units, consisting of 1 to 2,000 men, were armored and armed with swords, either lying in wait on the slopes or hiding in trenches slightly behind. As soon as they heard the sound of gunfire, they would flank from both sides towards the city wall. If Li Chen was just a moment slower, he would be blocked from entering the city, and then caught in a pincer movement, leading to his destruction. However, Li Chen was not made of clay. After several night raids, he had roughly figured out the operational patterns of the enemy's rapid response units, and he directly set his sights on them, deciding that whoever he targeted was fair game. He first had over 900 musket-wielding goblins hide behind the city gate, then led 310 system soldiers out of the city, preparing to feign an ambush on the enemy. In fact, the enemy had been keeping an eye on the city gate and had long seen Li Chen's soldiers exiting, but they deliberately allowed Li Chen's night raid to proceed because they wanted to outpace him and encircle and annihilate his troops. It was a gamble. Losing would cost them dozens of key soldiers, but winning would mean wiping out the enemy's elite, including a suspected leader. This time was no different. Li Chen's team had already been discovered as they exited the city. Yet he still successfully charged into the human positions, engaging in a brutal melee with the excavation team. As soon as the gunfire erupted, the hidden human rapid response units rushed out from their hiding spots, sprinting towards the Beloya city wall as if they were running 1,000 meters. As long as they could reach that place, all the rapidly running human soldiers thought this. The goblins on the wall spotted the rapid response units and quickly rang the bell. Li Chen, who was fighting fiercely with the excavation team, immediately ordered a retreat. However, this time their speed was not very fast, trailing behind the enemy's rapid response units. The enemy's rapid response units, seeing that the demon army's ambush team had not fled in a hurry but instead seemed to be keeping pace with them, were overjoyed. This time they had a chance to complete the encirclement. Each one ran even harder. Yet, their focus was entirely on Li Chen's troops, and they failed to notice that the Beloya city wall had also opened, with 4 mounted spiders pulling cannons charging out of the city gate and 900 musket-wielding goblins pouring out as well. Once they exited the city, they charged towards the human rapid response units, closing in at an astonishing speed of about 300 meters. Once they formed up, under the officers' shouts, the musket goblins raised their guns in unison. At this point, the enemy was already about 200 meters away, with over 1,000 men on both sides, nearly encircling Li Chen's troops. The human soldiers were extremely excited, too excited. They had caught up. They had finally caught up. However, the next moment, a thunderous gunfire erupted. A barrage of bullets shot towards the human rapid response units, erupting in a cloud of blood mist as human soldiers screamed and fell in droves. The 4 cannons also fired in unison, at a distance of 200 meters, over 400 rounds swept through the crowd, mowing down a swath of people. After firing, the artillerymen quickly hitched the cannons to the mounted spiders and ran back to the city, knowing they had no chance to fire a second shot, preferring to retreat first to avoid blocking the city gate during evacuation. The human rapid response team awoke from their stupor, only to realize they had been outpaced. The enemy's main force had actually exited the city. Everyone stepped back, panic-stricken. Li Chen led his troops into the left flank of the pursuing forces, tossing 2 explosive barrels to create chaos among the enemy. Then the musket-wielding goblins charged forward, firing at point-blank range, taking down 1 enemy with each shot. After the 900 musket goblins finished their first round of fire, they quickly reloaded and, at the sound of the charge whistle, shouted as they rushed towards the human soldiers on the left, also employing extreme close-range shooting. This round of charge fire decimated 1,000 enemies on the left. The remaining half of the human pursuit team was utterly terrified. My God, over 1,000 people, all dead in less than 5 minutes. Such terrifying combat power. Run, run. It was unclear who shouted, but the rapid response team fled, their comrades' swift demise instilling fear in them, their organization collapsing as they abandoned their gear and ran. They discarded their weapons, tossed aside their helmets, and stripped off their breastplates while fleeing, leaving a trail of various weapons and armor behind, resulting in a spectacular rout. The musket goblins executed the wounded remnants with bayonets, successfully killing over 1,000 enemies, with no casualties on their side. This achievement left everyone present incredibly excited. They all felt invincible. Li Chen wiped the blood from his great sword and, seeing the exhilaration on everyone's faces, felt equally thrilled. He raised his great sword and shouted, "Punishment Army! Mighty!" The heavy musket goblins were momentarily stunned, then all raised their muskets and shouted, in unison, "Punishment Army! Mighty! Punishment Army! Mighty! Punishment Army! Mighty!" The resounding shouts echoed like thunder, their morale soaring to the heavens. In that moment, the musket goblins fully understood the power of unity. As long as they stood together, they could even slay gods. The corpses around them had proven this point. With victory in battle, Li Chen upgraded his soldiers, gaining 43 more goblin sharpshooters, further enhancing the quality of his troops. Then, Li Chen ordered his men to scavenge the bodies. Over 1,000 corpses, all clad in plate armor, were dragged back to equip the goblins, allowing for an additional 1,000 heavy infantry. In the distance, the human camp was in disarray. This time they had been hurt, and no one dared approach the city walls to interfere. Li Chen's troops calmly scavenged the bodies and returned to the city with 1,000 sets of weapons after 20 minutes. The sky soon brightened, and the human positions regained some order, but looking at the over 1,000 corpses by the city walls, their morale remained low. Count Fisher arrived at the front lines and, seeing the soldiers so dispirited, knew this couldn't continue. He issued orders to the quartermaster. Provide the soldiers with drinks, have the kitchen prepare meat soup for lunch, let all soldiers have something good to eat, and advance next month's pay. Distribute it now. The quartermaster complied and respectfully reported, "My lord, the troops have very little drink. I suggest we only provide it to the frontline soldiers and immediately request more supplies from the rear. Additionally, we do not have enough fresh meat. I recommend sending some soldiers to hunt in the forest 10 miles away." The suggestion to hunt also implied raiding nearby farms. Count Fisher nodded in agreement. "Very well, go do it." This series of actions was quickly implemented with great effect. The soldiers' morale improved, especially those on the front lines, who were fortunate enough to drink precious wine. Their digging speed increased, with tens of thousands simultaneously excavating thousands of trenches, connecting them before nightfall to form a trench system, with a large number of soldiers stationed in the trenches. Li Chen, observing from the city wall, felt utterly helpless. There was no way to launch a surprise attack now. He could only watch. The enemy completed their defensive trenches and immediately began constructing offensive siege engines, with large numbers of soldiers wielding axes to fell trees and build massive siege towers. The siege tower would be as tall as the city walls, with a top that could accommodate dozens of people, and wooden boards at the front to shield against arrows. As the tower approached the city walls, the wooden boards would be lowered, allowing soldiers to rush up the boards and engage the enemy in battle, resembling a mole landing craft. The tower was enormous and heavy, requiring dozens of earth dragons to pull it to the city walls, with large tree trunks laid on the ground and a planned route to ensure a smooth path. The advantages of the siege tower were numerous, but the old mage Fortier had called the project to a halt. Old Dang looked at the lords as if they were sandbags. "I say, my lords, have you forgotten about the enemy's weapon that launches large iron balls? Are you building such a tall siege tower just to give the enemy a target?" The lords all felt embarrassed, realizing they had fallen into a habitual way of thinking and forgotten about the enemy's new weapons. The main siege tower was the most effective engineering tool of the cold weapon era, capable of mitigating the disadvantages of the city walls to some extent. It was impossible to rely on a crude ladder to attack the city, clumsily climbing up the walls, right? A single defender on the wall could hold a large section of it by throwing stones. The lords immediately adjusted their strategy and replaced it with a less effective, shorter, and lighter siege device, the ladder. The structure of the ladder resembled a fire truck with a low body and a large folding ladder on top. This thing was much lighter than the siege tower, and over 100 people could push it along. Once close to the city walls, the soldiers would push the folded ladder and the iron hooks would latch onto the walls, forming a slope of about 45 degrees upwards. The combat effectiveness of the ladder was significantly lower than that of the siege tower. The siege tower directly delivered soldiers safely onto the walls, and some towers were even built taller than the walls, allowing the attacking soldiers to gain a height advantage. With the ladder, soldiers still had to climb a slope of about 45 degrees to reach the walls, giving the defenders a height advantage, but bushes and falling rocks would be of no use. Although the ladder was not as good as the siege tower, it was certainly better than a rudimentary vertical ladder, and the low profile of the ladder meant that the enemy's iron ball launching weapon should not be able to hit it. This was based on their experience with crossbows, the high crossbows on the walls had no downward angle, and they believed the enemy's thunder weapons would be similar. The lords immediately ordered the construction of over 40 ladders, while Count Fisher also sent people to continue digging tunnels near the weak points of the walls. Li Chen had previously detonated a bomb here, causing a section of the wall to collapse, which was later repaired with large stones for about 10 meters, while the remaining 15 meters were patched with wood. The human soldiers dug 5 trenches, starting to approach the gap. As they neared the gap, the human soldiers switched to digging tunnels, making it impossible for firearms to shoot at the digging team. Several days passed, and the tunnel near the gap was completely excavated, with reinforcements made at the exit. Then the mages began to enter the scene, gathering fireball spells at the tunnel exit, each mage draining their mana and then smashing it against the wooden wall. Boom! 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 A series of 7 or 8 high-grade fireballs shot out from the tunnel entrance, smashing into the wooden wall and directly breaking the wooden stakes used for repairs. Li Chen was called over by the frontline officer, and upon seeing the fireball spells, or rather, what should be called explosive spells, shooting out, he noticed the wooden wall was pockmarked and severely damaged, on the verge of collapse. He immediately took out an explosive barrel, setting the fuse for about 5 seconds, igniting it with magic, and throwing it down the hole below. Boom! A thunderous explosion occurred, collapsing one of the tunnel entrances, killing the mages who had gathered explosive spells inside, with several others buried alive. However, the enemy had several exits, and the explosion caused a slight pause before they continued to throw explosive spells. Li Chen now had only 27 explosive barrels and needed to conserve them, so he refrained from throwing more. He said to the goblin spear, "Go call the incinerator squad over." Before long, 4 mounted spiders raced along the city wall, delivering 10 incinerator goblins. Li Chen pointed to the tunnel entrance below and said to them, "Do you see those holes down there? Throw fireballs inside." The incinerators immediately complied, channeling all their magical power as true fireball spells coalesced in their hands. The incinerators didn't need wands to cast spells. The red patterns on their bodies were a form of magical script, shimmering as they cast, with magic flowing along the lines and condensing into dark red, viscous flames in their hands. 4 fireballs were hurled from the city wall, crashing into the tunnel entrance and triggering a chorus of screams. A few mages inside the tunnel had just gathered their explosive spells, intending to rush out, when the sticky fireballs exploded right in front of them, flames instantly filling a large area of the tunnel. Several mages at the entrance were splattered with the viscous flames, the fire quickly scorching their mage robes clean, then gnawing at their flesh. In that moment, the noble mages faced death just like the foot soldiers. However, the mages still had their skills. Those who weren't caught in the flames immediately cast water spells to extinguish the fire on their screaming comrades. Quick! Cast healing spells together. With moderate burns, there's still a chance to recover, the leading mage shouted, and everyone immediately began to channel healing spells. The medical knowledge in this world was quite underdeveloped, as healing spells could almost cure all ailments, including burns. Several mages gathered healing orbs and pushed them into the bodies of the burned mages, rapidly healing their wounds. After 7 or 8 consecutive healing spells were pushed into the injured mage, he fainted from the pain, and the wounds on his body quickly healed, eventually returning to about 80% of a normal person's condition. Burns were very difficult to treat, and recovering to 80% was already quite good. The injured mage was taken away, and the mages used water spells to extinguish the fire at the tunnel entrance. They were a bit panicked and dared not throw fireballs into the tunnel anymore. Seeing everyone hesitating, the leading mage shouted, "Helping Count Fisher breach the city is Professor Fortier's order, and the precious magical tide observation instrument is an important asset that must be recovered. Quickly gather explosive spells to blow open the wooden wall and increase the army's chances of breaching the city." The mages in the tunnel exchanged glances, and no one moved. They were all esteemed mages, and entering the filthy tunnel was already unbearable. How could they endure the risk of injury or even death? The leading mage, seeing he couldn't motivate them, felt helpless. They were all instructors, and their levels were similar, so it was normal that he couldn't command them. He softened his tone, saying, "How about this? Let's borrow a few sets of armor from the soldiers, wrap ourselves in cloth, and wet it with water, so we won't be afraid of the fireballs above." Everyone thought this was a good idea, even If they were directly hit by fireballs, they could calmly run back and let their colleagues extinguish the fire with water spells. With the life-threatening danger removed, the mages threw explosive spells faster, launching high-energy magical orbs that smashed into the wooden wall, sending wood chips flying, and part of the wall caught fire. The incinerator goblins on the city wall continued to throw fireballs into the tunnel below, but the mages were wearing protective gear, and with colleagues behind them casting water spells to extinguish the flames, the fireball spells kept coming. A few minutes later, as two explosive spells struck the wooden wall simultaneously, the wall finally teetered and collapsed, exposing a gap about 10 meters high and 4 meters wide. The mages quickly evacuated the tunnel, running back to the mage camp, shedding their protective gear covered in mud and smoke amidst a chorus of wails. They hurriedly instructed their attendants to boil water for baths, using soap and perfume to dispel the earthy and smoky odors on their bodies, then selected a luxurious set of mage cloaks from the 30 or so carried by their attendants. Finally, feeling a bit more composed, they felt terribly wronged. The esteemed mage actually wanted to dig a tunnel and take on such terrifying risks. How unacademic! The mages participating in the bombardment of the wooden walls had begun to resent the old mage Fortier, who had issued such a malicious order. But no matter how much they complained, they still managed to open a breach in the city wall. Count Fisher ordered the entire army attack. Nobles for the first climbers. The human soldiers instantly became fervent titles. As long as they were the first to reach the wall, they could be addressed as Sir. At that moment, everyone transformed into beasts, determined to rush up the wall and change their fate. The sound of the military horn echoed through the sky as the human soldiers pushed over 40 ladders toward the wall, and the battle for the defense of Poloya officially began. Maintain formation. Once the ladders are set up, charge the wall immediately. No hesitation. Nobles for the first climbers. Such shouts rang out from the mouths of the military officers and nobles, stirring the soldiers into a frenzy. Transforming from nameless soldiers into beings worthy of being called Sir was enough to make the soldiers present risk their lives. The human soldiers began to push the ladders, which had several wooden stakes underneath to support over 60 people pushing the cart. The surrounding boards provided a small amount of defense, and with the people pushing from outside, each ladder required over 120 people to push. To prevent fire, the ladders were coated with mud. The fireballs from the incinerators could not directly burn down a ladder, making it a well-thought-out plan. 40 ladders were deployed, with 20 attacking the west of the city and the rest attacking the south and east. The breach in the wall was on the east side, where 5 ladders were attacking. Li Chen's defense arrangement was that he would guard the west city gate to counter the enemy's main assault, accompanied by 500 penal troops armed with firearms and 500 heavy infantry. Goblin Spear would guard the east city gate with 200 veteran penal troops and 500 heavy infantry. Goblin Bow would guard the breach in the wall with 300 penal soldiers and 500 heavy infantry. The north and south walls were overseen by 2 level 5 camp leaders, each leading 100 veteran penal troops and 500 heavy infantry. 4 cannons were set up at each city gate for support. 3,000 spear-wielding goblin recruits were equipped with short spears, wooden shields, small axes, chainmail, leather armor, cloth armor, and kettle helmets. Their equipment was a hodgepodge, and their combat effectiveness was questionable, but they had undergone several months of military training and had developed some discipline. Some of these recruits were stationed on the wall, while most were evenly distributed at the city gates and breach. In the training camp, there were another 3,000 goblin recruits who had received less than a month of military training. Li Chen did not take them out, allowing them to continue their training. Inexperienced recruits could easily make mistakes on the battlefield. If they fled, it would severely impact the morale of the veterans. The siege could last a long time, 6 months to a year. Was not impossible, so he decided to let them continue training, planning to bring them to the battlefield after 3 months of practice. Moreover, Goblin had brought 500 firearms before, so Li Chen selected the best among the new goblins to form 5 firearms militia companies. The combat effectiveness of the firearms militia was not as strong as that of the penal troops, mainly due to their lack of proficiency with the firearms and fewer bullets than the penal troops. These individuals did not go up the wall but were assigned by Li Chen to guard near the city gates, preventing anyone from seizing the gates. As for the 2,000 law enforcement troops, they were led by Knight Leo, whose sole task was to maintain order in the city, assisted by Miss Hannah, who brought human system soldiers. Now, there were only 40,000 people left in the city. Li Chen had caused a wave of panic when he broke the city, killing many while leveling up, scaring off many more, and began to spread the word about the siege, which gradually frightened away a large number of people. The remaining 40,000 were truly the lowest of the low, and many were slaves. Indeed, the kingdom of Sassos was a highly slave-dependent nation. In the city of Poloya, with a population of 150,000, after filtering through, there were actually tens of thousands of slaves and a reserve of slaves who could not survive. Li Chen made a decision to drive away the enemy and attempt to bring these people back to the Alliance territory. With so many people joining, the Alliance's risk resistance would greatly increase. However, for now, these individuals were an unstable factor that needed to be monitored closely. Li Chen set up a security zone in the residential area about 300 meters from the city wall. Anyone daring to approach this area would be captured. Both sides were ready, and the offensive and defensive battle began. Li Chen watched as the enemy's siege ladders slowly approached, accompanied by infantry, and ordered the officers beside him, "Let the enemy come within 50 paces, then fire at will." The siege could last for an unknown duration, so they needed to conserve ammunition. His command was loudly repeated by the officers, reaching the ears of all the soldiers, who raised their weapons and aimed at the enemies below. The human soldiers pushed the siege ladders forward with a very anxious mindset, fearing the enemy's special weapons. But as they pushed the ladders to within 200 meters of the city wall, there was no attack from above. Goblin Hong, standing beside Li Chen, reminded him, "Boss, aren't we going to fire? If the ladders get any closer, we won't be able to hit them." Their cannons had a depression angle of only 5 degrees, and at the 25-meter-high city wall, there were many blind spots where they couldn't hit. Li Chen shook his head as he looked at the more than 20 slowly approaching siege ladders. "Don't fire, conserve ammunition. I want to let the enemy get closer before we strike, to inflict maximum damage." With the muskets and the city wall in place, Li Chen wasn't afraid of not being able to hold the wall. He was worried that the enemy would collapse too quickly and that he wouldn't be able to inflict heavy casualties on their elite forces. So he decided against using the cannons, and instead aimed to kill the enemy up close, delivering a painful blow. The soldiers on the wall stared intently at the siege ladders, with 500 musket barrels following the enemy's movements. Li Chen also took out a musket with +10 accuracy, aiming at the enemy. When he felt the enemy was about 50 meters away, he pulled the trigger first. With a loud bang, a soldier pushing a cart screamed and fell, followed by a volley of gunfire from the other musket-wielding goblins, filling the battlements with thick white smoke. Below, the soldiers pushing the cart immediately erupted in screams, as many of them fell to the ground. Li Chen tossed the musket to a nearby soldier to reload, picked up a new gun, aimed at a human soldier in a trench wielding a crossbow, and fired, blowing the enemy's head apart, leaving a corpse. He grabbed another gun and shot, killing another cart-pushing soldier. 3 men reloaded for Li Chen as he fired rapidly, honing his crossbow skills. While shooting, he shouted, "Everyone, shoot calmly. Take your time, conserve ammunition, and aim for 1 shot, 1 kill." Accompanied by his shouts, the soldiers' firing rate decreased significantly, but their accuracy improved. Below, the cart-pushing soldiers were being shot down one by one. Those inside the cart, shielded, suffered fewer casualties, while those outside faced a grim fate, with several waves of deaths. The siege ladders moved from 50 meters to 40 meters, and over 300 cart-pushing soldiers had died, causing the ladders to stop due to a lack of manpower. This terrifying casualty rate made the subsequent cart-pushing soldiers hesitant to enter. Was this a game? Wasn't the death rate absurd? Wearing heavy armor was of no use at all. Was this just a death sentence? They were all scared and shrank back into the trenches, afraid to step out and take their positions, extinguishing the fervor of the nobility. The frontline sergeants grew anxious and shouted at the soldiers, "Get moving, hurry up and fill the positions. We're only 40 meters away, 40 meters to the base of the wall. Anyone who doesn't move will face military punishment. Push the ladders to the base of the wall and earn 10 silver coins." Under the threat and temptation, the soldiers, with mixed feelings, rushed out of the trenches to fill the positions by the ladders. The ladders, which had just stopped, began to move again, but there were over 500 muskets on the wall. Would it matter how many more came? The sound of gunfire echoed, and the cart-pushing soldiers screamed as they fell, with so many bodies around the ladders that it was almost impossible to stand. The number of casualties was too high, and the soldiers pushing the carts were frightened, beginning to flee. Their escape triggered a small rout among the soldiers in the trenches, and the sergeants could not stop them no matter how hard they tried. In the first siege, the humans left behind over 300 corpses and fled in disgrace. In the core of the human camp, Count Fisher was furious. He roared at his subordinate lords, "Damn cowards. Dare to abandon their engineering tools. Execute all the deserters. Let the others see what happens to those who flee. Replace them with another group at the front line and continue pushing the carts." Once the order was given, all 200 soldiers who were pushing the carts in the front line trenches were executed, serving as a harsh deterrent to everyone else. However, a new wave of soldiers entered the front line trenches and began pushing the carts, only to be met with gunfire, causing them to abandon their helmets and armor. This time, fearing execution, the soldiers left behind over 400 corpses at the city wall before they fled. The deserters were also aware that returning to the rear would lead to capture and execution. Driven to desperation, a few soldiers conspired to rebel together, killing the sergeants and a minor noble. Over 200 deserters shed their armor, scattering in dozens of directions, running around the trenches, planning to escape directly into the mountains. The supervisory team had no horses and didn't even know how to pursue them. Now Count Fisher was a bit at a loss. Pushing a cart had cost him nearly 1,000 men. Such a level of loss was no longer just a matter of orders not being executed properly, but rather a mistake in decision-making. The enemy's weapons were too sharp. If they continued to fill the gaps with lives, even with 70,000 men, they would not be able to withstand it. At this moment, a lord proposed a desperate tactic. He said that the engineering ladders were only 30 meters from the city wall, and if they acted quickly and decisively, they could push the ladders to the wall in just a few minutes. To avoid precious soldier casualties, he suggested abducting serfs from the surrounding farms to push the ladders. Many of these serfs had families, and the offspring of serfs were also serfs. Landlords would force serfs to marry each other to increase the labor force. As long as they held the families of these serfs hostage, they wouldn't have to worry about them not working hard. This resolution was quickly implemented, and human soldiers swept through all the villages within dozens of miles, gathering over 3,000 serfs with families to push the carts. While the human soldiers went to capture the serfs, the ladders were left in place, and Li Chen contemplated burning the ladders. He called upon the incinerator goblins to throw fireballs, attempting to burn the ladders down. However, as soon as a fireball was thrown from the city wall and struck the ladders, before the ladders could suffer significant damage, water balloons flew out from the trenches to extinguish the fire. Both sides engaged in a day-long battle of offense and defense, with the incinerators working hard to burn down 3 ladders, but due to excessive mana consumption, Li Chen called a halt. In truth, he was indifferent about whether to burn the ladders. He wanted to strike at the enemy's living forces. As long as the siege equipment was not in place, the enemy would remain trapped in the trenches, which was unacceptable. Li Chen gazed at the enemy's position from the city wall, unsure of when the next attack would come, but he knew the enemy was brewing something sinister. After inspecting the morale of the soldiers on the wall, he entered the city tower to lie down and rest. As the leader of the entire army, he had to maintain his spirit. He needed to rest and recover as soon as he found an opportunity, for if the situation worsened, he might have to endure several days without sleep. Lying in bed, Li Chen began to check the system. Out of 310 system soldiers, over 200 could be upgraded. He clicked to upgrade directly, and the Punishment Army's old 10th Company gained another 200 level 3 Goblin archers. After 1 or 2 more battles, the entire Punishment Army's old 10th Company would become level 3 soldiers, truly an elite force with combat experience. After assigning levels to the soldiers, he began to check his own attributes. At that moment, his attributes were Vitality 25, One-Handed Weapon Proficiency 12, Two-Handed Weapon Proficiency 101, Polearm Proficiency 8, Control 12, Bow Proficiency 18, Crossbow Proficiency 78, Throwing Weapon Proficiency 68, Stamina 11, Riding Proficiency 0, Running Proficiency 67, Forging Proficiency 80, Cunning 7, Scouting Proficiency 43, Tactics Proficiency 25, Rogue Habits Proficiency 17, Social 7, Charm Proficiency 25, Leadership Proficiency 72, Trading Proficiency 0, Prayer Proficiency 0, Intelligence 15, Management Proficiency 37, Medical Proficiency 1, Engineering Proficiency 28, Magic Proficiency 28. Li Chen sighed, reflecting that it had been almost a year since he arrived in this other world. From a tribe that relied on foraging, he had transformed into a warlord capable of shaping his own destiny, which he considered quite an achievement. He noticed that his proficiency with the crossbow had risen to 78, unlocking a 2-choice skill, likely accumulated from his experience with firearms. Li Chen directly selected Dynamic Vision. With this skill, as long as he concentrated, the world around him would enter a slow-motion state, similar to bullet time. Li Chen blinked, focusing his attention, and the world around him began to slow down. Sunlight streamed through the gap outside the door, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Li Chen could see the dust moving very slowly, even able to roughly predict their trajectories. Li Chen was overjoyed. This passive skill was fantastic and greatly enhanced his abilities. He didn't take a break, pushing open the door and walking towards the arrow tower on the city wall, a structure about 10 meters taller than the wall itself. Li Chen climbed up the arrow tower, and the squad of the Punishment Army on duty stood at attention, their faces filled with respect as they saw their leader arrive. Boss. Return to your positions. 3 of you come help me load bullets. Li Chen took out 4 firearms with plus 10 accuracy from the warehouse. These were the guns he had crafted for himself. He leaned the 4 firearms against the city wall and picked one up, aiming it at the people below. The arrow tower was 35 meters high, allowing him to see almost the entire battlefield. Below the city wall, the ground was pockmarked with trenches. The trench 200 meters from the wall either had tunnels or wooden barriers, allowing human soldiers to keep their heads down and avoid being shot by the firearms on the wall. Li Chen rested the firearm on the parapet and began searching for a shooting target. He quickly spotted a trench being dug about 150 meters away. Since it was newly dug, the defenses were not very solid. The soldiers in the trench were focused on digging, their heads occasionally peeking out with slight movements. Li Chen set his sights on one of them. The exposure of the soldier's head was minimal, sometimes appearing and sometimes retreating. A normal person would find it nearly impossible to hit such a small target with a firearm. He saw a tunnel reinforced with wooden signs about 170 meters long. The wooden sign stood at the edge of the tunnel, blocking the view from the city wall, but there was a gap in the middle of the sign through which he could see someone walking back and forth. In the trench, Li Chen carefully observed the gap and realized that this was likely an important traffic route with someone passing by almost every second. He aimed his gun at the gap, focusing intently to open his dynamic vision and observed the soldiers' patterns through the opening, waiting for the right moment to fire again. The bullet shot through the gap in the wooden sign just as a soldier walked by, hitting him dead on. For the next 10 minutes or so, Li Chen kept firing from the arrow tower. Almost every time he pulled the trigger, an enemy was killed, and he became increasingly skilled at using his dynamic vision. The goblins on the city wall also figured out what was happening. Their boss was target shooting. They focused intently, occasionally catching glimpses of enemies being killed through various gaps. Most of them were goblin archers who naturally understood how difficult it was to achieve such a level of skill, and they all marveled at how impressive their boss was watching Li Chen shoot. Every time Li Chen fired, the goblins cheered excitedly. However, Li Chen soon stopped shooting. After more than 10 minutes, he had killed 12 enemies, and the remaining foes, no matter how dull, knew they had to hide well. No one dared to expose themselves to give him another chance. Li Chen reluctantly put down his firearm, feeling he hadn't had enough fun yet. Just as he was thinking of taking a break, a series of loud bugle calls came from the human camp, followed by a large number of people dressed in tattered clothing emerging from the camp, entering the trench, and heading toward the city wall. There were so many of these ragged individuals that they quickly filled hundreds of trenches. Li Chen thought to himself that the enemy was finally ready to attack the city, and he shouted loudly to his soldiers, "Get ready for battle! The enemy is coming!" Again! The officers' shouts and the bugle sounded, and the soldiers immediately sprang into action, grabbing their weapons and rushing to their combat positions, setting up their firearms on the battlements. Li Chen carefully observed the enemy below and discovered that the humans entering the trench were not soldiers but serfs dressed in rags, their faces showing signs of pain. He looked at the ladder only 30 meters from the city wall and cursed, realizing these people were captured to be used as cannon fodder. Li Chen was slightly shaken. These serfs were not foreigners but proper Sassos people. Such actions were typical of a national army capturing its own citizens to use as cannon fodder, something only the armies of a declining dynasty would do. He felt a headache coming on. These serfs were not his subjects and he had no psychological burden about killing them, but the problem was that these guys were of low value and would deplete his ammunition reserves. Precious firearm ammunition was one less shot with each use, and now his army had about 40,000 rounds in stock. The men of Count Fisher stood there, and he couldn't shoot them all before running out of precious ammunition. Only shooting heavily armored soldiers could recoup the costs. Seeing those poor serfs about to be sent to the battlefield as cannon fodder, Li Chen ordered his subordinate officers, "Didn't we capture 500 crossbows earlier? Bring them up for the soldiers to use, and tell them to use crossbows against enemies they can't penetrate with firearms, and use guns against those they can." The 500 crossbows were sent up to the city wall and distributed to the goblin marksmen, most of whom were tier 3 goblin archers and were skilled with crossbows, so they could use them right away. Once equipped, the serfs seemed to accept their fate and charged out of the trench toward the ladder. They had been chosen to be cannon fodder, and many had wives and children. If they didn't push the cart, their families would be killed by Count Fisher's army. For the sake of their families, they had to overcome their fear and rush onto the battlefield. After the efforts of the first 2 waves of soldiers, 17 ladders were now very close to the city wall, only about 30 meters away. 3,000 serfs almost simultaneously rushed out of the trench, screaming in terror as they surrounded the ladder and began to push. The cloud ladder was large and heavy, yet with so many people pushing, it was still visibly advancing. "Fire! Fire with all your might!" Li Chen ordered loudly, and the goblins on the city wall began shooting arrows, a torrential rain of arrows raining down on the frenzied crowd below. The crowd let out cries of agony. Those struck by arrows fell to the ground struggling, but no one would come to their aid. Their fate was to bleed to death. The goblin archers remained calm and collected, shooting with their crossbows, especially the bows, which could shoot as soon as an arrow was knocked, much faster than firearms, proving surprisingly efficient at killing unarmored targets. Bolts and arrows rained down from the battlements, met with the wails of the serfs. But these unfortunate souls were far more motivated in pushing the carts than the soldiers of Count Fisher, for the sake of their wives and children. Even if they were struck by several arrows, as long as they weren't dead immediately, they gritted their teeth and persevered, unwilling to fall. Seeing their desperate struggle, resembling that of death warriors, Li Chen could roughly guess that their families were under the control of Count Fisher. He felt a bit sorry for them, but with differing stances, he picked up a strong bow and aimed his arrows at the crowd with the utmost speed. The serfs gritted their teeth, enduring casualties, as one body after another fell by the cloud ladder, with serfs stepping in to take their place. 25 meters, 20 meters, 15 meters, 10 meters, the area around the cloud ladder was densely packed with corpses, a path of bodies extending to the city wall. Finally, with over 2,000 corpses as a foundation, 17 cloud ladders were pushed to the base of the wall. The folding ladders were opened, the rungs set against the city wall, and the iron hooks on the ladders firmly latched onto the wall. Once the iron hooks of the cloud ladders were secured to the wall, they were difficult to remove. What followed was no longer the serfs' responsibility, and the surviving 1,000 or so serfs were allowed to live. They dragged their weary bodies back to the camp, hoping to reunite with their wives and daughters, only to be horrified to find that Count Fischer's soldiers had transformed into goblins, and everything that could go wrong had. Each of them felt their minds explode, harboring immense hatred, just waiting for the right moment to erupt. Human soldiers began to enter the fray, with heavily armored soldiers first entering the trenches. Once assembled, at the command of the bugle, they charged out of the trenches, up the ladders, and towards the city wall. Count Fischer promised that if the city fell, he would reward the first climbers with the most fertile lands of his family, offering 100 gold coins with rewards for all those who achieved merit. The soldiers' morale was once again stirred, shouting as they charged upward. 17 ladders, 17 points of entry. A large number of heavily armored soldiers climbed the ladders, while the firearm-wielding goblins set down their bows and crossbows, picking up their more familiar firearms to begin shooting. The soldiers climbing the ladders were exposed, and with the sound of gunfire, their heavy armor was easily pierced, and the climbing soldiers fell with cries of agony. However, the opposing side was truly on a roll, charging quickly and decisively. The ladders were wide enough for two people to ascend together, and these soldiers, shields raised and swords held high, charged forward with fierce cries. Firearms, after all, had a slower rate of fire, and under such an offensive, they couldn't completely block the advance, allowing human soldiers to reach the city wall. But once they got up there, it was truly a slaughterhouse. "The honor of the first climber is mine," a human soldier shouted as he leaped onto the wall, but the next moment he was pushed onto the wall by a dozen long spears. He didn't even have time to react before a goblin wielding a spear shot him dead. More human soldiers jumped from the ladders onto the wall, only to be met by dozens of heavily armored goblins blocking the way. They raised various weapons, striking the enemies to destabilize them, causing them to fall, then shot them dead with firearms. Of course, this was still the best-case scenario. At least they died on the wall. The worst fate was for those who just peeked over the ladder, only to see a dozen guns aimed at them, and as soon as they touched the wall, they were dead. There was another group nearby, surrounded by incinerator goblins, who were throwing sticky fireballs onto the ladders. The ladder was covered in thick mud, temporarily resistant to fire, but the people were terrified. One by one, sticky fireballs exploded above the crowd, scattering the viscous flames everywhere. The human soldiers engulfed in flames screamed in agony, their armor searing hot, and the skin in contact with the armor was in excruciating pain. More importantly, they were on fire and desperate to extinguish it. There was water on the ladder, and those on fire wanted to run back, but the people behind were rushing forward, creating a deadlock. They could only jump down from the sides. From a height of over 10 to 20 meters, they jumped down like dumplings, many breaking their legs and howling in misery. Li Chen stood guard at a section of the wall where the ladder was secured, drawing his great sword. With one swing, he knocked down a human soldier who had just charged up, then struck down hard at the opponent's helmet-protected head. The immense force of the heavy sword crushed the helmet, shattering the skull beneath. Just as he killed one, another enemy appeared on the ladder. As the enemy attempted to jump onto the wall, Li Chen thrust his sword out, sending the opponent tumbling down the ladder. From a height of 25 meters, the enemy let out a William scream, crashing to the ground and dying. With a control attribute of 15, he could better mobilize all his muscles for more effective movements. He single-handedly held a passage, swinging his greatsword left and right, leaving a sea of corpses around him. The wall was as solid as gold, and the ladder had become a stairway to heaven. Anyone who climbed it met death. After leaving behind over 800 corpses, everyone was terrified, and morale was about to plummet. The nobles at the back realized this was untenable. If they continued like this, morale would collapse. Count Fischer felt a pang of frustration. Damn it! Why were these goblins so hard to kill? This was infuriating. He ordered his soldiers, bring Kaso up. Before long, a 2-meter-tall, muscular beastman with yellow-black fur and a tiger's head was brought up by the soldiers. This guy had shackles on his neck and hands, and a slave brand on his pumpkin shoulder. Named Kaso, the tiger beastman stared intently at Count Fischer. He was originally a minor chief of a tiger beastman tribe in the Orc Kingdom, but after losing a territorial battle against other orcs, he and his tribe were captured and sold into slavery to humans. However, how could a tiger willingly accept captivity? Even though he was bound by iron chains, he still fixed his tiger eyes on Count Fischer, as if ready to pounce and kill him at any moment. Count Fischer found a mage to act as a translator and said to him, "Do you see the wall in the distance? I will give you 500 auxiliary soldiers. Take your 500 kin to attack the city. If you succeed, I will grant you freedom and support you in returning to your homeland. How about it?" Kaso's tiger eyes lit up. "Human, swear to your deity." Count Fischer smirked, insincerely swearing, "A goddess of life, as long as Kaso and his kin assist me in breaching the city, I will grant Kaso and his kin freedom and fund his return to his homeland." Is that sufficient? His attitude towards the deity made Kaso frown and snort. "A disrespectful man to the gods, you will pay for your insolence in the future." Count Fischer scoffed. Deities had not manifested in thousands of years. If it weren't for the chosen ones still active in the world, the existence of deities would have become mere myth. Count Fischer waved his hand. "Release his kin and provide them with armor and weapons." Kaso was taken down by the soldiers and returned to the rear of the camp, arriving at a prison area where over 500 tiger people were held in iron cages. All were tall and muscular, each possessing strength of 3 or even 2 Nors, and they were naturally fit. The human soldiers opened the cages, releasing the tiger people, then tossed down 500 sets of chainmail. The plate armor was custom-made and could not be worn if it didn't fit, but the chainmail could be adjusted in size, suitable for mass equipping. Kaso's handcuffs and neck shackles were removed, and a human sergeant struggled to carry a double-bladed battle axe and handed it to Kaso. Kaso took the weapon with one hand, swinging it effortlessly. What others found heavy, he could wield with ease. The sergeant pointed to the distant siege battlefield. First, go down the tunnel close to the city wall, then climb the ladder and kill everyone inside, and you'll be free. Damn, I forgot you don't understand the common tongue of humans. Kaso ignored the guy's words. With the armor, he felt like the king of beasts once again, raising his double-bladed axe and roaring, "Blood sacrifice to the beast god." The other newly freed tigermen also raised their weapons and shouted, "Blood sacrifice to the beast god." Kaso led everyone charging towards the city wall. Li Chen was happily leveling up, and the section of the city wall he was guarding was piled with dozens of corpses, with even more bodies stacked at the base of the wall, having fallen to their deaths before even climbing up. A human soldier was preparing to ascend the wall when Li Chen swung his sword again, crushing the opponent's helmet and shattering his skull, causing him to fall off the ladder. Li Chen took a breath, feeling like he had just warmed up, thinking the enemies were too weak. When would he get a super soldier to play with? Then, in the next moment, a very swift figure jumped onto the wall and landed in front of Li Chen. Li Chen was startled, and upon closer inspection, he saw that the newcomer was very tall and strong, not wearing a helmet, revealing a furry tiger head dressed in thick armor and wielding a massive double-bladed axe. The tiger man Kaso quickly steadied himself after jumping onto the wall, locking his gaze on Li Chen. Li Chen's shiny armor was a clear sign of a big shot. Kaso let out a tiger roar and issued a 1v1 challenge, then without waiting for Li Chen's consent, swung his double-bladed axe at him. Li Chen saw that the opponent was even bulkier than himself and knew the newcomer was not to be trifled with. He gathered his strength and swung his great sword back at Kaso. The double-bladed axe and the two-handed greatsword clashed in the air with a loud clang, sending sparks flying. Li Chen was knocked back a step, his hands feeling numb. He was somewhat shocked. This tiger man was incredibly strong, and despite having the power of one Kunyuo, he found himself outmatched in strength. The opponent must have at least 3 Nuwa of power. Kaso cleaved at Li Chen with his axe, letting out a tiger roar, and many tigermen rushed up the ladders around them. These guys were fast, almost all jumping directly into the city wall, crashing into the defending soldiers, and upon landing, they swung various two-handed weapons, wildly slaughtering the surrounding goblins. The goblins, who were already prepared, didn't care whether the ones climbing up were human soldiers or tigermen. They pressed their firearms and spears down, killing them mercilessly. However, due to the tigermen's robust physiques, they managed to secure a foothold on the wall and carve out a small area, causing some casualties among the goblins. Some goblins pressed their firearms forward and shot at the tigermen. These tigermen seemed to be built differently. After being hit by the firearms, they howled in pain, but instead of dying, they became enraged, crazily hacking at the surrounding goblins. Li Chen realized they were facing tough opponents and shouted, "All company commanders, hold the line, don't let the wall fall." The company commanders were all level 5 and 4 soldiers, with strength levels similar to Li Chen, all tough goblins. Upon hearing the order, they raised their heavy shields and one-handed weapons, charging in to fight the tigermen, while other goblin marksmen coordinated seamlessly, continuously shooting at close range. If one shot didn't take them down, then 2 shots, if 2 shots didn't do it, then 3. After giving the order, Li Chen quickly raised his long sword to block as the strongest tiger man jumped up again, ready for another fierce clash. Li Chen knew he was outmatched in strength, but his coordination was far superior, so he employed techniques to deflect the force, continuously parrying the incoming double-bladed axe. The two sides exchanged blows for over 10 rounds, and Li Chen found an opportunity to jump back, creating some distance between himself and his opponent. Immediately, 5 musket-wielding goblins charged forward, their gun barrels aimed at Kaso as they pulled the triggers. Bang! 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 After a series of gunshots, Kaso trembled violently, taking 5 shots directly to the chest. Li Chen grinned, thinking that no matter how strong you are, you can't withstand a musket. He expected the tiger orc to fall. But instead, Kaso staggered a few steps before steadying himself, then let out a roar and charged at the penal soldier who had shot at him, axe raised. "Get out of the way!" Li Chen shouted in alarm, ordering the musket goblins to fall back. As he raised his sword to meet the charge, he cursed inwardly, wondering if this guy was made of iron. How could he still be standing after taking 5 shots? He swung his sword at Kaso's waist, but to his surprise, Kaso didn't block. He took the blow head-on. Li Chen felt something was off as his sword failed to cut through Kaso's armor. The orc was wearing at least 3 layers of protective gear. Kaso absorbed the blow and then swung his double-bladed axe down from above. Li Chen cursed again, raising his sword to block and deflect the force, and the two resumed their fierce battle. After another 20 quick exchanges, Li Chen noticed that Kaso was starting to tire, panting heavily. Seizing the opportunity, he struck Kaso several times, forcing him to retreat. This guy was incredibly strong, but his stamina wasn't that impressive. However, he was tough as nails, having taken several hits without any visible reaction. Orcs in this world were known for their robust vitality and high physical strength. Their muscle and bone density surpassed that of other intelligent races. Moreover, Kaso was a tiger orc, one of the strongest among orcs, and he was clad in 3 layers of leather and iron armor. Thus, the 5 close-range musket shots and Li Chen's sword strikes were all absorbed by him. Of course, it still hurt. When Li Chen found another opportunity to strike Kaso's waist, Kaso let out a furious roar and erupted with renewed speed, swinging his double-bladed axe even faster. Li Chen was forced to retreat under a flurry of 3 axe strikes in a single second, relying on his deflection skills to counter the blows, sparks flying as their massive weapons clashed. As they were entangled, a large number of tiger orcs surged up the ladder Li Chen was defending. As soon as they landed, they charged at the surrounding musket goblins. The goblins were unable to assist Li Chen, each engaged in their own battles with the tiger orcs, swords and muskets clashing, resulting in casualties on both sides. Li Chen felt a pang of regret. Every soldier lost from the penal unit was a significant loss. He wanted to break free to kill other tiger orcs, but this towering orc kept sticking to him, preventing his escape, and he couldn't kill him just yet. Li Chen considered retrieving a hand cannon from the warehouse to take a shot at Kaso. At such close range, even if it couldn't penetrate the 3 layers of armor, it could shatter his sternum. But with both sides fiercely engaged, any distraction could lead to a fatal opening. If only someone could delay him for a second. Li Chen silently shouted in his mind, and then he saw a musket goblin, knife bayonet in hand, sneaking up on Kaso from behind. It was Kanda. Kanda ignored all the enemies around him, rushing to Kaso's back, first pressing the musket against Kaso's back and firing a shot, then recklessly stabbing at Kaso's calf with the bayonet. The shot was blocked by Kaso's 3 layers of armor, but he had no leg armor, and the bayonet pierced through. Kaso let out a terrible scream and swung his double-bladed axe in retaliation. Kanda, being quick-witted, abandoned the musket and dropped to the ground to avoid the axe. He then raised the hand cannon hanging at his waist and aimed it at Kaso's chest, firing a shot. With a loud bang, a barrage of projectiles erupted, striking Kaso's chest. Kaso screamed in pain. The chamber pressure of the hand cannon was lower than that of a musket, and its projectile power and range were less than that of a standard musket, but at such close range, Kaso took nearly all the projectiles to his chest. He felt as if he had been struck by a charging earth dragon. His chest bones shattered beyond count. Kaso fell heavily, coughing up a mouthful of blood. Then he saw that the goblin he had just been fighting was also raising a weapon that had dealt him a heavy blow, aimed directly at his unprotected face. Kaso's pupils constricted as he raised his massive double-bladed axe to shield his face. In the next moment, Li Chen fired, a barrage of bullets striking Kaso's double-bladed axe, which was large and thick enough to block all the pellets. However, Li Chen had prepared 10 hand cannons in his warehouse, and he retrieved another one, this time aiming for Kaso's chest. The armor on his chest had already been shredded. Another shot would surely kill him. Kaso sensed the threat of death, and his instinctive reaction was incredibly strong. He rolled, somehow managing to tumble down the city wall and into the Baroya district. This guy could be considered the first true entrant into the city, as well as the first to be captured. The spear-wielding goblin recruits stationed at the foot of the wall were idly standing around when suddenly, a massive axe clattered down onto their faces, startling them as they rushed over. Kaso fell from a height of 25 meters, not knowing how many bones he had broken. He was alive only due to the orc's extraordinary physical resilience and could barely stand. Li Chen shouted to the goblin recruits below, "Bind him with iron chains and go find Mage Hannah. Have her heal this guy, don't let him die, I need him alive." After shouting, Li Chen looked at Kanda, his face full of admiration. "Well done, soldier." Kanda's severely disfigured face flushed slightly as he held the hand cannon given to him by Li Chen, puffing out his chest. "Your Majesty, the punishment army is mighty." Li Chen waved his hand. "Don't call me your Majesty, call me boss. That's what other races call me. Be boss." Li Chen nodded, putting away the hand cannon and drawing his great sword. "Soldiers, let's drive away. All the enemies together." "Yes." Li Chen lunged at the other tiger orcs, starting to push the enemies off the city wall. In fact, even without him, the tiger orcs were already struggling. These guys had started off incredibly fierce, strong and fast, and wouldn't fall even when hit by gunfire, like little supermen. But their stamina was depleting faster, and with many heavily armored big goblins surrounding them and hacking away, the tiger orcs couldn't break through. They were quickly overwhelmed. 20 minutes later, the last tiger orc was pinned against the wall and shot dead by 10 muskets, and all enemies on the city wall were exterminated. "Victory!" someone shouted, and all the goblins on the wall cheered, and as they shouted, someone suddenly began to sing the Punishment Army's anthem. It started off chaotic, but as it progressed, it became more synchronized until thousands of voices merged into one. "Raise the muskets against the infantry, fix the bayonets against the cavalry, united under the banner of the Round Star, bloody to defend the alliance." On the human side, the soldiers slumped wearily in the trenches, their eyes tired. They listened to The harmonious singing, even though they couldn't understand Goblin language, they could feel the pride in it, which made them feel even more dispirited, their morale plummeting to negative numbers, a very dangerous situation. In the human camp, inside Count Fisher's tent, Count Fisher's eyes were bloodshot as he glared at the gathered nobles. "Gentlemen, can anyone tell me? What should we do?" The nobles fell silent for a moment, and one noble shamelessly declared, "My lord, we have more numbers. Please continue the attack, relentless attacks. The enemy will tire, and we will eventually take Beroya." Another noble opposed, "No. The soldiers' morale is already low. If we adopt such a suicidal strategy, there will be a mutiny. I think we shouldn't be considering how to attack right now, but rather how to stabilize the soldiers' morale." Count Fisher said, "Alcohol, provide the soldiers with alcohol, no one will refuse the intoxication of spirits. Last month I had 1,000 barrels of wine transported from the territory, which should help boost the soldiers' spirits." The nobles exchanged glances, and one of them cautiously said, "My lord, a few days ago the soldiers reported that the demon army's cavalry attacked the wine convoy, killing all the draft animals and farmers and breaking all the barrels." "Ah!" Count Fisher lost his composure and roared. That damned spider cavalry had been harassing them for days, mainly operating in their rear and always striking at night. Every night, they ambushed small groups of troops, killing them and then fleeing, occasionally bombarding their main camp with special weapons, with large iron balls, sometimes killing 1 or 2 people, causing panic in the camp. Reluctantly, Count Fisher had to dig trenches in the rear to fend off a mere 100 cavalry. The trenches did prove effective. The enemy could no longer launch reckless surprise attacks. Then they turned their sights on the logistics troops and those hunting in the forest, cutting off their supplies. Count Fisher wanted to cry, "Damn it, if it weren't for the kingdom's call to war, requiring every lord to provide the requested number of troops, he wouldn't have sent 2,000 family cavalry to the northern battlefield, leading to his current severe lack of cavalry. Being bullied by just 100 enemies like this was too tragic." The lords chattered away. There was no way, the enemy's weapons were too strong. They felt they couldn't capture the city at all. Count Fisher began to have second thoughts about retreating. Should he just give up? But so many had died, all elite members of their families, and with the other lords' losses, the damage was immense. If they couldn't take Beroya to recover, the material loss was secondary. The loss of prestige was far more important. This time, no one gained anything from responding to his call to war, and they lost so many people. Would anyone follow him next time? Families could fall from first-class nobility. So, he didn't even dare to consider retreating. Just as Count Fisher was in a dilemma, the old mage Fortier, sitting in the corner smoking a pipe, spoke up. "I say, if I can break through the city wall and allow you lords to enter and fight the enemy, do you have confidence in taking Beroya?" "Oh, what good plan does the advisor have now?" Count Fisher looked at the old mage Fortier, feigning hope on the surface while inwardly cursing. Damn it, these mages clearly possessed immense power but were unwilling to fight for it. If the mages donned heavy armor, he would have the soldiers escort them to the city wall, and the mages could cast fireballs at the enemy, easily creating a landing zone to take the wall. But this group of self-proclaimed noble mages was unwilling to risk their lives. When he previously asked them to climb into the trenches to help extinguish a fire on the siege ladder, they whined for ages. He didn't even know what use these mages were to him. It was like raising 200 grandfathers. Damn. The old mage Fortier appeared relaxed, slowly packing his pipe with tobacco as he said, "I am confident I can create a 10-meter wide opening in the city wall. If we launch the attack suddenly enough, the enemy won't have time to fortify the breach. You can let the soldiers rush through this opening into the city. Can you take Beroya?" Count Fisher's face lit up with joy. "Ah, advisor. Inside Beroya, the houses are densely packed. As long as our soldiers rush in, they can easily establish a foothold. Once we enter urban combat, the enemy will lack firing range, and their combat effectiveness will decrease. We can maximize our numerical advantage and easily take Beroya." Old Mage Fortier nodded, clenching the pipe filled with tobacco in his mouth, and with a fingertip he released a small flame to ignite the pipe, sitting there smoking in silence. The nobles were bewildered. Wait, why is no one speaking? Everyone exchanged glances, wondering if the old man was just teasing them. Count Fisher reacted quickly. The other party was clearly looking for benefits. But what kind of benefits did they want? Count Fisher recalled the ways of the Magic Guild, which loved to establish colonies, set up magic schools, and recruit children with magical talent. Once these children completed their apprenticeship, they would be sent to the territories of the Mage Guild for further training. This was how the mages of the 4 human nations were monopolized by the Magic Guild. Count Fisher had already regarded Beroya as his own territory, and he knew the dangers of allowing the Magic Guild to establish a colony there. He had no intention of agreeing. However, seeing the old man sitting in the corner blowing smoke rings, he realized that if he didn't show enough sincerity, the other party wouldn't reveal the method to break the city walls. Count Fisher sighed and yielded. "I've heard that the Magic Academy in Beroya is only as large as a few housing districts. That's really too small. It should be expanded." The old mage Fortier chuckled, puffing on his cigarette as he asked, "So, my lord, how much do you think it should be expanded?" After a round of verbal sparring, Count Fisher ultimately promised that after breaking the city he would allocate 1/10 of Paloya's urban area to the Mage Guild as a colony. That's right, 1/10. A large town capable of housing 150,000 people, and, just like that, a portion was beautifully carved out for the mages. This was the value of magical monopoly. With the price settled, old Mage 40er stood up and brushed off non-existent dust from his mage robe. I need 5 days to prepare. Lords, please. Choose the location for breaking the city and dig the pits under the walls in advance to ensure the element of surprise. After saying this, he walked out of the tent and returned to the mages' camp, gathering all the mages together. Everyone, get ready to create a chaotic magic array. Upon hearing chaotic magic array, the mages' expressions varied. Some looked hopeful, some appeared worried, while many looked confused, clearly unaware of what a chaotic magic array was. One mage asked anxiously, "Professor, are you sure we should create a chaotic magic array? It can be quite dangerous." Old Mage 40er nodded. "Don't worry, I have participated in the research and creation of chaotic magic arrays multiple times. There won't be any problems, and we only need to make a small chaotic magic array." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this and then became excited. Not everyone had the chance to see a chaotic magic array. The chaotic magic array was developed by the Magic Guild to observe the natural magical tide changes. In the southern part of this continent, there is a large volcano and a vast desert. According to legend, in ancient times, a demon god died in the south, and after his death, his body emitted a large amount of fire. Elemental magic, scorching the entire southern region into a desert. As time passed, the fire elements accumulated in the desert, and with the magical tide, they moved northward. When this intense fire magical tide encountered opposing magical forces, such as water elemental magical tides, it would react violently, resulting in a massive explosion. After such an explosion, heavy rain would fall from the sky, and the regions of the monster forest and the southern territories of the 4 human nations would become extremely fertile under the blessings of this rain. In fact, the collision of opposing magical energies causing explosions was not a rare phenomenon. The Magic Guild had discovered this natural occurrence thousands of years ago. However, the professors studying magical tides found that if 2 opposing magical forces collided with enough force, the resulting explosion could trigger a phenomenon known as chaos magic. Simply put, when 2 similar magical forces collide and explode, if the explosive yield is large enough, it can cause a chain reaction, leading to explosions of natural magic in the surrounding kilometers. After the explosion, the magical energy near the blast point becomes chaotic, extremely active, and can penetrate matter, causing anyone who passes through the chaotic magic zone to die in 1,000 wounds. The Magic Guild is currently conducting extensive research on artificially triggering chaotic magic, developing a type of magical bomb that can instantly destroy several kilometers, or even tens of kilometers. However, after hundreds of years, the professors and mentors of the Magic Guild have concluded that with the current magical technology mastered by humanity, it is impossible to trigger chaotic magic. The Magic Guild once linked 200,000 magical crystals together, injecting opposing energies of water and fire into them, and then detonated them using a magic array. They indeed triggered a tremendous explosion that destroyed everything within a radius of 500 meters, but it did not cause a chain reaction, nor did it produce chaotic magic effects. This is akin to piling up as much TNT as you want. It still isn't a nuclear bomb. The professors speculated that perhaps the purity of the artificial magical energy was insufficient, and the detonating magic array needed improvement. Following these cutting-edge studies, a series of auxiliary products emerged, such as small chaotic magic bombs. Returning to the topic, 200 mages began to move, linking thousands of opposing magical cores together, aiming to create a powerful magical bomb capable of collapsing a section of city wall without issue. This required the mages to painstakingly inscribe magical runes, and without a magical tide observation device, they had no way of knowing whether there were magical tide interferences nearby, making this work quite difficult and prone to waste. Fortunately, with over 200 of them, even with a high waste rate, they could still produce a magical bomb in 5 days. The mages focused on the magical bomb, and the perspective temporarily shifted to Gobu Run. After parting ways with Li Chen, Gobu Run first found a cave in the mountains to store the supplies he didn't need, then set out lightly armed to harass Count Fisher's army with cavalry. Gobu Run had deeply grasped Li Chen's guerrilla tactics, never confronting the enemy head-on, always maneuvering and launching surprise attacks, using the fast-moving spider mounts to exploit the advantages of special terrain, inflicting severe pain on the enemy. As soon as they appeared at the enemy's weak points, a volley of gunfire would spell death for them. Gobu Run also frequently launched nighttime attacks, bombarding the enemy's main camp with 2 cannons. The sound of the cannons was so loud that it kept the enemy awake, making them too anxious to sleep. Eventually, Count Fisher could no longer tolerate it and had trenches dug behind the camp, surrounding it, and issued long spears to the infantry, ordering them to stay in the trenches day and night. Now Gobu Run truly dared not approach the bombardment recklessly. He began to target small enemy units, such as those hunting in the mountains, those transporting military supplies from the rear, and those fetching water. Making it extremely difficult for the enemy to operate, they stopped hunting, ceased logistics, and even had to form groups to fetch water. After several days of ambushes, Goblin found that all the high-value targets he could attack had been dealt with, and the remaining ones were either unreachable or not worth the cost of the cannonballs, leaving him somewhat confused about what to do next. At this moment, Goblin received reconnaissance reports from his subordinates, saying they encountered a convoy coming from the west. Goblin immediately led his men to ambush this convoy, killing all the drivers and livestock and destroying all the barrels of goods. At that time, over 1,000 barrels of wine were poured out into the wild, the aroma wafting for several kilometers. Naturally, Goblin had people bring back a good amount to the cave, and the cavalry drank to their heart's content. Since Li Chen was not around and the cavalry had separated from the main force, military discipline was somewhat lax, and the cavalry got themselves drunk one by one. Fortunately, they were hidden in a deep mountain cave, otherwise, if the enemy found them, they would have been wiped out in one fell swoop. Goblin also got a bit tipsy, but when he saw a fool pouring wine into the spider mount's mouth, getting it drunk, he suddenly became alert. Damn it, I was hurt by wine and lust, and I ended up looking so haggard. Tomorrow, I will quit drinking. The main reason is that we haven't fought any major battles these past few days, and the troops have gradually become lax. If we don't make a change, relying solely on Goblin's verbal education won't bring the soldiers back in line. We must immediately find a valuable target to lift the soldiers' spirits and get them into a combat state. Goblin thought long and hard and came up with an idea. If we can't find a valuable target on the front lines, why not directly poke into the enemy's lair? Right now, the human army is concentrated in Baroya, so the enemy's rear must be very weak. With my 100 cavalry being fast and strong in combat, the soldiers can shoot, and the spider mounts can use their 2 strong front limbs to kill. Using 100 cavalry as if they were 300 is no problem. At that time, he would crush the enemy's weak rear guard and then, like the boss, use explosive barrels to blow open the castle gates when encountering a fortress. If he meets nobles, he will kill them. If he meets serfs, he will let them go. Can the enemy in front still feel at ease? Goblin immediately ordered everyone to pour out all the alcohol, saying that they would quit drinking. Then he took all the supplies and headed west towards the home of Count Fisher to kill. They spent 2 days leaving the Baroya jurisdiction and encountered the first castle. As he expected, the enemy's home guard was very few. A medium-sized castle should normally have around 500 stationed inside, but after breaking the castle, Goblin found only about 40 guards, all equipped with cotton armor and armed as second-line infantry. Goblin used explosive barrels to break the castle, and he hardly fired a few shots. He simply used the 2 front limbs of the spider mounts to stab to death all the guards. After that, Goblin killed all the nobles, set the castle ablaze, and then continued west along the main road. On the way, he encountered many merchant nobles, all of whom he killed because the boss had said that those dressed in finery were the ones who could mobilize social resources, and they were his enemies, so they had to be decisively killed. Conversely, the ragged serfs could be let go. They would become unstable factors for the enemy, and keeping them alive would benefit the alliance. It must be said that this simple distinction really made a difference. Goblin killed many merchant nobles, spreading panic among the upper class of the Halian province, causing rumors to fly. Goblin advanced westward, burning down 5 castles, destroying 8 farms, and killing many nobles, almost all of whom were family members of the generals in Count Fisher's army. When news of the theft of their homes reached the front lines, one could only imagine how chaotic those generals would become. However, Goblin's exploits did not stop there. He continued west along the main road and unexpectedly arrived at a paved road. He still remembered when he was in the Alliance territory, the boss wanted to build a road connecting Goblin Fortress and Iron City for easier communication between the 2 sides. Goblin realized that if he followed this paved road, he would surely find a big city. You wouldn't believe it, but this main road connects to the main town of Count Fisher, Nucia. This is a large town with a population of 90,000, making it the second most important town in the Halian province after Baroya. Goblin led his 100 spider cavalry for 3 days and successfully arrived at the city gates. This scared the defenders of Nucia to death. Had the Count's army been defeated? Had the main force of the demon army arrived here? Each one was terrified, and rumors spread throughout the city. Nucia only had 1,000 regular troops, and with the militia and security forces, they could barely muster 2,000 people. Fortunately, they had 15-meter-high city walls, and with the propaganda and reassurance from the city's officials, the people's hearts gradually stabilized. The townspeople thought to themselves, why panic? Nucia has high city walls. Could the mere demon army really break through the walls and rush in? Then the city walls were blown up. Goblin piled all the explosive barrels against the city wall, blew a big hole, and the spider mounts surged in, charging into the city to kill and set fire. This is truly outrageous. The existence of the city walls serves not only as a physical defense but also as a spiritual one for the people. The demon army had barely arrived for a day, and the walls were already breached. Who the hell can stand that? Various rumors began to spread like wildfire, claiming that the demon horde was attacking, that the city would soon be slaughtered, that Count Fisher's army had been defeated, that Count Fisher had been barbecued, and that the guards on the walls had fled in advance. It was a case of scaring themselves, and the city was thrown into chaos. The first to believe the rumors and flee were the nobles within the city, who packed their families and left in their carriages. Seeing this scene, the commoners were thrown into a complete panic. If the nobles were running, then the rumors must be true. This led to widespread riots in the city, with people trying to escape, jostling at the city gates, while those with ill intentions began to seize the opportunity to loot and burn, further escalating the chaos. After the goblins entered the city, they did not engage with the regular army but instead controlled their riding spiders to rampage through the city, killing and setting fires. The mobility of the riding spiders in such a complex environment was absurdly high. They could easily scale a building by placing their front legs on the roof and pushing up with their hind legs. Nearly 100 spiders moved across the rooftops, shooting at the human regular army pursuing them on the main road from safe positions. After 7 or 8 rounds of fire, the human soldiers, unable to reach the spider cavalry, lost 5% of their numbers to gunfire and began to scatter. Once the regular army broke, the auxiliary troops also fled, spreading the rumors even further, and the chaos intensified. Fires broke out all over the city, and a large population fled the urban area. It was a rare sight for such a large town to be thrown into such disarray by just 100 riders. Li Chen, who remained in Baroya, could not have imagined that the goblins he had defined as a harassment force would pull off such a grand act, stabbing Count Fisher in the back and laying the groundwork for future victories. Unfortunately, fires were also breaking out behind Li Chen now. A special force was stirring up public opinion in the Baroya urban area, attempting to incite rebellion among the remaining personnel, and there were signs that this wind was being fanned by the security forces. On the 4th day after defeating the Tiger Beastmen, Count Fisher had yet to launch an attack. Li Chen received news from the new recruit camp that the 3rd batch of new recruits had completed their training, so he took the opportunity to inspect the new recruits. The 3rd batch consisted of 2,000 goblin recruits equipped with spears, armed clothing, leather armor, and a small amount of chainmail. They stood in the training ground, divided into 20 formations, perfectly aligned and disciplined. Li Chen nodded in satisfaction. This batch of new recruits was ready and could be sent to the battlefield. He drew 200 big goblins from the front lines to serve as officers, forming 20 new recruit companies, placing these new recruits at the city gates as reserve troops. When the time came, they would take turns on the walls to experience the atmosphere of battle. After a few rounds, the new recruits would become veterans. As soon as the new recruits left, the vacated barracks were immediately filled with a new batch of goblin pups, about 1,500 of them. The livestock area was still producing, and it wouldn't be long before another 1,000 goblin pups were born. Li Chen reflected that, despite goblins being inherently weak, once they could be effectively organized, their potential for war was remarkable. Who would have thought that when he first arrived, there were only a little over 1,000 of them, and now their numbers had nearly multiplied tenfold, growing with every battle. If this war could drag on for a year or so, they might be able to train an army of 100,000. Li Chen was truly amazed when the grim-faced Knight Leo approached him. "Your Majesty, I have something to report." Upon hearing someone call him Your Majesty, Li Chen's eye twitched. After all, he possessed a modern soul, and this title felt strange to him. Initially, he had only claimed kingship to leverage the system's military support, just going through the motions. He had told his subordinates not to call him Your Majesty, as the alliance was not an empire. The goblins had always called him boss. But the humans insisted on calling him Your Majesty, and no matter how he tried to change it, it just wouldn't stick. Later, he also understood that these people calling him Your Majesty was actually a form of psychological comfort for themselves. Compared to mingling with a monster warlord, it was certainly more prestigious to associate with a monster king, so they had firmly established the title of king for Li Chen, rendering his own words ineffective. "Well, what do you want to say?" Li Chen replied. "Your Majesty, I've noticed that the security forces have been very restless lately. It seems someone is plotting a rebellion." Li Chen narrowed his eyes, a dangerous atmosphere emanating from him. "Elaborate." Knight Leo slowly recounted the events. Ever since the siege began, the personnel left in the city had been in a state of panic, and a certain special force was exploiting this fear to incite civil unrest, which had also infiltrated the security forces. The gist of this unrest was that the demon army would eventually be defeated by the forces of the Kingdom of Sassos, and when the city fell, their second-rate troops would face reckoning. If they wanted to atone and save themselves, it was still not too late. They just needed to storm the city gates, open the doors from the inside, let in Count Fisher's army, and they could wipe their slate clean and even gain considerable benefits. This unrest had a significant impact, primarily because the security forces themselves knew that if the city fell, they would definitely be held accountable. Their current actions were no different from those of traitors, and the Kingdom of Sassos executed traitors by burning. Moreover, even if the demon army drove Count Fisher's forces away, so what? They were humans, goblins were monsters. Could humans have a future following these monsters? They felt lost about their future. If it weren't for the fact that many people in the city were struggling to survive and joined the security forces for the sake of earning silver coins, along with the goodwill Li Chen had built up among the populace, a riot would have likely broken out long ago. After hearing the whole story, Li Chen looked into Knight Leo's eyes. Tell me, Knight Leo, can you still restrain the security forces? Knight Leo was drenched in sweat. If he couldn't restrain the security forces, the slaughter would likely commence. He hesitated but still spoke truthfully. Your Majesty, if we don't do something to curb this, a rebellion from the security forces is only a matter of time. After saying this, his heart began to race. As a human, he certainly didn't want his fellow countrymen to be killed, but now he was Li Chen's dog, so he chose to speak honestly. Li Chen squinted in thought, then slowly spoke. Knight Leo, go fetch someone from the security forces who can speak. I need to talk to them. Knight Leo acknowledged and was about to go call for them, but after taking a few steps, Li Chen stopped him. Knight Leo, you've been with me for so long, you know me. I do not kill indiscriminately, but if things cannot be salvaged, can you clarify your own position? Knight Leo wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and immediately knelt down. Your Majesty, my position is to uphold your interests. Li Chen raised his chin. Very well, you have feelings for your own race and wish to protect them. This is a common sentiment among intelligent beings.